of death when you say it's a light agenda.
Yep.
Recording in progress.
Okay, Mr. Marshall, I see attendees are starting to come in. We are live, we are recording. Amherst Media is here. You're good to go.
All right. Welcome to the Amherst Planning Board meeting of February 2nd, 2022. My name is Doug Marshall, and as the chair of the Amherst Planning Board, I am calling this meeting to order at 6:35 p.m. This meeting is being recorded and is available live stream via Amherst Media. Minutes are being taken. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this planning board meeting, including public hearings, will be conducted via remote means using the Zoom platform. The Zoom meeting link is available on the meeting agenda posted on the town website's calendar listing for this meeting, or go to the planning board webpage and click on the most recent agenda, which lists the Zoom link at the top of the page. No in-person attendance of the public is permitted. However, every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access the meeting in real time via technological means. In the event we are unable to do so for reasons of economic hardship or despite best efforts, we will post an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting on the Town of Amherst website. Board members, I will take a roll call. When I call your name, unmute yourself, answer affirmatively, and then place yourselves back on mute. Maria Chow.
Present.
Jack Jemsek.
Here.
Tom Long.
Present.
I'll skip Andrew. I don't see him yet. I, Doug Marshall, am present. Janet McGowan.
Here.
And Johanna Newman.
Present.
Board members, if technical issues arise, we may need to pause temporarily to fix the problem and then continue the meeting. If the discussion needs to pause, it will be noted in the minutes. Please use the raise hand function to ask a question or make a comment. I will see your raised hand and call on you to speak. After speaking, remember to remute yourself. The general public comment item is reserved for public comment regarding items that are not on tonight's agenda. Please be aware the board will not respond to comments during general public comment period. Public comment can also be heard at other times during the meeting when deemed appropriate. Please indicate you wish to make a comment by clicking the raise hand button when public comment is solicited. If you have joined the Zoom meeting using a telephone, please indicate you wish to make a comment by pressing *9 on your telephone. When called on, please identify yourself by stating your full name and address, and put yourself back into mute when finished speaking. Residents can express their views for up to 3 minutes or at the discretion of the planning board chair. If a speaker does not comply with these guidelines or exceeds their allotted time, their participation will be disconnected from the meeting. All right, so the first item on our agenda this evening is approval of minutes from past meetings. And Chris, I know we have at least one set of minutes to review. Do we have more than one, or should we just proceed with the January 19th minutes?
You just have January 19th, and I'm sorry that they were sent out so late. I think I sent them out yesterday at 5 minutes to 5. Doug gave me a 5 o'clock deadline.
And I did appreciate that you got them out by that time. I think it's good for all of us to have an evening to look at them. I know at least my days on Wednesdays, I don't really have time to review anything after work on Wednesday before our meeting starts. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. Are there any comments on the minutes as drafted and sent out yesterday? Jack?
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to look at them, so I'm sorry for that. Just want to say that.
Okay, thank you. Chris, I see your hand.
We could put the adoption of the minutes off till next time, but Pam and I feel really good that we got them into you in a timely manner. Yay, Pam. She did the bulk of it and I finished it up. So you might want to put it off, but there were two things that I wanted to mention. One is that Janet emailed me about an issue about lighting, and it was something that Andrew had brought up during the Wagner public hearing, and it had to do with adequate lighting in the area where the farm stand is going to be. And I noticed that after I received Janet's email, I looked at the revised management plan, which the Wagners submitted through Tom Reedy, and it lists hours of operation of the business of dawn till 8 o'clock. And in the section where the management plan talks about lighting, it says that adequate lighting will be provided as needed during the business hours. So I wonder if we incorporated that language into the minutes, if Janet would be satisfied with that.
All right, Janet.
That sounds great, because I was more worried about it going into the decision. So that sounds perfect.
Okay, because we do make reference to the management plan in the decision. We say that it shall be done in accordance with the management plan. So, okay, good.
Okay.
All right, great.
Oh, and one more thing. I did add a condition to the Amherst College project to say that they needed to come back to show you the signs, because although you granted them a waiver under section 8.5 of the zoning bylaw with regard to size and number of signs, I thought since they've shown you all of the other signs that they're proposing, that it would be good if they came back and showed you the signs that they're proposing for the Lyceum. And if you agree with that, then we'll incorporate that one last condition.
Okay. Any objection to that? Not seeing any objection. Does anybody object to postponing the vote on these minutes until next meeting to give everyone a chance to read them? All right, not seeing any objection. Why don't, Johanna?
Sorry, is there any harm to postponing other than they don't become available to the public for review for an additional 2 weeks?
In the past, when
I mean-
we were in trouble, excuse me, may I answer that?
Sure, Chris.
When we were in trouble with our minutes, Pam was posting draft minutes. So I could ask Pam to post these as a draft, if that would be suitable to you.
I think that would be a good idea. I think we don't want to get in the habit of, getting behind on minutes again. So
Okay.
let's just, what's the agenda for next meeting look like? Is it going to be pretty full?
We don't know yet. Don't know yet.
Okay. All right, so why don't we just postpone this until the next meeting? And so that's really it for the minutes. Jack? Jack, you are muted. You are still muted.
Yeah, regarding the next meeting, I have a scheduling conflict, unfortunately. It's my wife's birthday, and I made plans way back in the fall. So I'm going to see John Mayer.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, any John Mayer fans out there, he's really good. Anyway, I will not make that particular meeting. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there others who want 2 weeks to be able to read the minutes?
No.
Because if we can either vote tonight without Jack, or it sounds like we could vote in 2 weeks without Jack.
Let's do it tonight.
So I'm kind of wondering whether we ought to just do it tonight. All right, I saw a couple of heads nod. So would anybody like to make a motion to approve the January 19th minutes with the modification regarding the lighting that Chris and Janet discussed earlier? Tom, I see your hand.
So moved. With the addition, Chris, do we need to add the Amherst signage note that you had as well? Yeah, and with that addition, so moved.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Anybody want a second?
I'll second.
All right, thanks, Janet. Okay, so let's see, any other comments on these minutes? All right, then we'll go ahead with a roll call. And Jack, feel free to abstain or, just trust everyone else. All right, Maria and Tom,
Approved.
we'll skip Andrew. I'm an approve. Janet
Approve.
and Johanna.
Approve.
All right, and Jack.
Yeah, I'll just abstain. Sorry about
All right.
that.
Good. Okay, thanks all. All right, so that was item 1 on the agenda for this evening. The time now is 6:45, and we'll have our public comment period. And I will repeat what we said in the introduction, that this period is for comments for items not on the agenda. So it will not include comments on the demolition delay bylaw proposal, on the solar bylaw proposals. So does anybody want to make any public comment this evening? I do see 25 people in the attendees. Ira Brick, I see your hand. And we will go with 3 minutes as your limit. You need to come off of mute. There you go. Good. We should be able to hear you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Ira Brick, excuse me, 255 Strong Street. Just a couple of thoughts on what I would love to see as a change in how the planning board does their work. I would love to see going forward more including questions in your deliberations that deal with the unintended consequences, which of course you cannot know, but you can discuss. What is the cost of doing nothing? What are the trends and forces affecting Amherst? I'd like to see more focus on what we do want to attract into this town instead of just dealing with proposals and kind of nibbling around the edges of those proposals. And in a lot of those proposals, you can see that these are trends and forces that are affecting towns, especially college towns and cities around, some of which have gone very badly. I've suggested this before, but just to put our heads together in this university town with an architecture department to create a model of a profitable building that is 3 stories or maybe 4 stories with commercial on the first floor. Upstairs, there's a mix of rental and ownership with students, families, retirees, and professionals with the proper setbacks, design elements, and promotes community. And just even, I remember walking into a gallery in Northampton once, and the architecture class taught by Steve Schreiber said, here's some kind of Frank Lloyd Wright, energy efficient houses. These are model homes. They don't really exist. There's not even a development, but here's what we're thinking. I would love to see that. Here's what we're thinking. The planning department has what it takes to put together a couple of samples, a couple of models. Lastly, I would love to hear the board members routinely include their understanding what they're hearing from people that are opposing ideas. People like me and others that are taking the time to look at these meetings and stay abreast of the issues and express ourselves often feel disregarded and often feel, I've heard many comments about how we're being disregarded, even purposely disregarded. So I would love to hear from you what you understand that is sane, that you understand about the people that are disagreeing. So thank you so much and good luck.
Thank you very much, Ira. All right, the next hand I see is from Kitty Axelson Berry. And that hand, I believe, just disappeared.
Yeah. There she is.
All
Hi,
right,
Kitty. I think
Yeah.
you're on mute. There you go.
There I am. Okay, I just want to thank you all for appreciating the importance of taking minutes and of keeping the public well informed and, you know, understanding that as a need and acting on it. So that's all I have to say tonight. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Kitty. All right, so I don't see any other public comments, any hands raised. All right, so moving on to the third item on the agenda, the time is 6:49. And we'll go into the discussion of the zoning article 13 demolition delay. This is not a public hearing at this time. I understand this simply to be a presentation. And Chris, disagree, please raise your hand if you disagree with that. I see your hand.
I don't disagree, but I think it's important for the planning board to feel free to have an opportunity to ask questions and make comments, because we will learn from those questions and comments about how to make this better. So I hope that the planning board will speak. Thank you.
All right. All right, so this is a presentation proposal by Historical Commission members Jane Wald and Jan Marquardt and Planning Department Planner Ben Brager. So would any of the three of you like to make this presentation? And Pam, I assume Jane is in the attendees list, and maybe we want to bring her in.
I did
Oh, here
bring
she
her
is.
in.
Okay,
She's
good.
here.
There
She's
she is.
here.
And I see there, then I see Professor Marquardt as well.
Mhm.
And I'm probably mispronouncing your name. I'm sorry. All right, so take it away.
Okay, thanks so much. I'm Jane Wald. I'm the chair of the Amherst Historical Commission, and I'll be sharing this presentation with Jan Marquardt and Ben Brager. So I'll kick it off, and then Ben has a brief PowerPoint that he will put up on the screen as we go along. I think I'd just like to begin, well, again, with thanks to you for inviting us to this meeting and to be able to discuss the proposed revised bylaw. Just very, very quickly, a little bit about the Historical Commission itself. It's been in place in Amherst since 1972 and is organized under the direction of the Massachusetts general laws. It has a kind of a range of responsibilities and projects. It is, in a sense, kind of the steward of Amherst's historic assets. We do things like we prepare and update a town-wide preservation plan. The Historical Commission in the past has also created a preservation plan for the town cemeteries and has been making progress against that. The commission is also responsible for generating listings for the National Historic Register. These have included National Register districts. There are 9 of them in Amherst right now, as well as nominating individual properties to be listed. The Historical Commission has been the original driver behind study committees that have now created 2 local historic districts in the town of Amherst. The commission sometimes publishes interpretive materials, creates interpretive signage, such as the recent Writer's Walk, and can also nominate historic preservation projects by individual property owners for distinctions for the Amherst Preservation Award and for awards at the state level. Perhaps its best known activity is to administer what Article 13 of the Amherst zoning bylaw, which is named the demolition delay bylaw. The purpose of that bylaw is that it is a tool one of the few tools, or perhaps the only effective tool the Historical Commission has to gain time to consider alternatives when property owners wish to make changes to an historic structure or to take down an historic structure altogether. Sometimes those projects can have some other kind of outcome, and the delay allows the Historical Commission to work with the property owner to explore other alternatives. So in this instance, for this proposal, for this new draft of a bylaw, this came out of kind of a series of conversations in 2015 when the Historical Commission was asked by the Planning Department to think about how to revise the demolition delay bylaw to achieve greater clarity in its terms and definitions for applicants, and how it and streamline the process for implementation. So we had numerous conversations with the building commissioner and staff in the planning department to analyze what was working in that bylaw and what could be revised so that it better met the needs of the cause of preservation in Amherst and met the needs of citizens, homeowners, property owners, with the sometimes opaque process of making their way through the conditions of the bylaw. So in the beginning, we kind of tried to edit what was there and found that it really needed some reorganization so that the policy and the process were clear and divided. So each was separate and more intelligible. But we kept the old bylaw as a guide, and we have been functioning under that bylaw since its beginning. But as we went along through this kind of study process, we looked at the bylaws of other comparable sized towns in Massachusetts, and there are a couple dozen that whose profile was similar to ours. The Massachusetts Historical Commission, the State Historical Commission, had also produced a kind of guide for demolition delay bylaws that has served as a good resource for us. We also had a kind of lengthy conversation and workshop with Massachusetts Historical Commission staff to get specific advice as we made our way through thinking about what could change with the bylaw. I guess, overall, in comparison to some of the other towns in Massachusetts, our bylaw is not the least restrictive. It's not the most restrictive. It kind of falls somewhere in the middle. As we looked at all of this information and tried to begin to put it together, this has been a process that's taken us now a little more than 6 years. But we think we have achieved clarity and a good set of guidelines for the town of Amherst. One thing I'll just mention right now is that the previous declaration of policy and the purpose statements, and Ben, do you want to bring this up? This is kind of the first item in a very brief PowerPoint. We combined those and simplified them, and we'll come back to some of those points later. I guess one of the main things I want to say at this point is that the name of the bylaw has, we've tried to update the name of the bylaw so it emphasizes the actual positive purpose, which is the preservation and protection of historic assets in Amherst, rather than what can seem to be a more negative message by focusing on demolition. The preservation is really at bottom, it's more long-term thinking that brings the past into the present and then advances the protection of those assets into the future. And it is, we are wanting to think of it in that more constructive manner rather than just really focusing on demolition. Let's see, I think you have this text available to you, so maybe we can just move on to the next slide, which this says a little bit more about what the impetus behind the proposed revision is. And what we found was that, this is back some years ago now, that the definitions in our bylaw were vague to the point that they did not give sufficient guidance to the building commissioner in either approving what were clearly permissible actions as opposed to those that were really focused on preservation. So we wanted to tighten up those definitions. Demolition itself, that word was poorly defined, and its vagueness created impediments for people who were applying for building permits. The result of all of this was that many demolition permit applications made their way to the Historical Commission when there really was no preservation purpose to them. We found that there was a kind of a clog in the pipeline where staff could not efficiently determine the need for public hearings concerning these applications. And the combination of having the building permit and the consideration of demolition by the Historical Commission was complex and confusing. And then finally, our demolition delay bylaw appears in the zoning bylaws rather than within the general bylaws, is the case in most Massachusetts towns, and is in fact recommended by the Historical Commission. So I just wanted to make those few points, and Ben will take it from here and say a little bit more about what the new draft entails and what its improvements are.
Great, thank you so much, Jane. And hello, everyone at the Planning Board. Thanks for having us today or this evening. So yeah, I'm going to go through kind of an overview of our proposal. What is a new preservation bylaw? We're calling it the Bylaw for the Preservation of Historically Significant Structures. Some of you might remember, I think I gave a similar but a little bit longer presentation, I think back in June now, so it's been a little while. But I did try to get the text to you late last week, so hopefully you had time to look at it. But I'm just going to kind of run through some of the broad strokes changes that were made from Article 13 to this new general bylaw. So the first bullet point, we are proposing to move this from the zoning bylaws into the general bylaws. That's for a few reasons. First is just what is recommended by the state and how most other towns in Massachusetts handle the demolition bylaw. If you really think about it, it's not much really a zoning matter. It's more of a, how people use their property sort of matter, which we feel is more appropriate in the general bylaws as opposed to the zoning bylaw. So, the local historic district bylaw is also in the general bylaw as opposed to zoning bylaw. So there's some precedent for that in the town. Another reason is also the built-in appeals process. So if zoning bylaw matters, if there's an appeal, that is appealed to the zoning board of appeals, and they really look more at, was the process of the bylaw followed, as opposed to kind of the substance of the, was the determination of significance correct or not. So in the case of an appeals, we didn't think it was appropriate for the ZBA to handle an appeal of a demolition delay bylaw. So that was another reason to move it to the general bylaws in this case. So, and I guess that also does, in terms of process, and maybe Chris can expand on this later. Really, the vote from the planning board would be essentially to remove Article 13. But obviously, we're here today to you all. The planning board needs to be comfortable that whatever we're proposing as a general bylaw, you feel is sufficient to replace the zoning bylaw. So. That's kind of one of the first major changes. The second is kind of a bit more nuanced, but it's to create a new certificate process for applicants, which kind of helps separate the historical commission and the building department review and their timeline. So right now, the way it's structured is that an applicant submits a demolition permit, and that permit is first reviewed by the historical commission through Article 13. And then we send, if it's approved for demolition, we send notification to the building commissioner to approve the permit. Or if we put a delay on it, then that permit just kind of sits in limbo for up to 12 months. And that creates an issue because the building department has their own kind of shot clock, if you will, where they need to act on permits. And so if we're putting a delay on the permit, it just kind of sits, like I said, in this limbo state, which is not great practice, I guess, because technically the building department is supposed to be acting on the permit one way or another. So we're proposing to kind of separate those processes. So first, an applicant would, if they're intending to demolish a structure, they would come to the historical commission first, get approval or a delay, and then move on to the building department, as opposed to kind of doing them in parallel. And so this also, it's similar to how the local historic district operates. The historical commission would generate a certificate. We calling it a demolition authorization or a preservation order. And so a demolition authorization would be required to get your demolition permit. And that would be a certificate granted to the applicant that's stamped by the town clerk and recorded. And we just feel like that's a kind of a cleaner way to do it that creates a record of the decision by the historical commission, and also kind of, again, separates it from the building department. So we don't think that actually, it's more of kind of an internal process, I guess. It only really impacts the applicant in that they will get an official stamped certificate one way or another. And then thirdly, I think one of the major changes to this bylaw is what we're calling the two-step review process. And so most demolition delay bylaws are structured this way, where first there's a determination of significance. So is the building historically significant? And there's a set of criteria that are outlined in the bylaw. However, the way our bylaw is structured now is that that decision is made at a public hearing by the historical commission, and it's at that same public hearing where the determination of to put a delay is made. And so what that results in is that for structures that are proposed to be demolished that don't necessarily, like Jane said, don't necessarily rise to the occasion of preservation, they are forced, if you will, to kind of go through them, wait for a public hearing, have notice to abutters, and then only to have the commission run through the criteria to vote for that the building is not significant. So what we're proposing is kind of a two-step process where a kind of a team of one staff liaison for the historical commission and one historical commission member kind of discuss, run through their criteria themselves to determine if the building is significant or not, and then determine whether a public hearing is required. And certainly if there's disagreement, then the default is just to move to a public hearing of the historical commission for that review. So our hope is that that kind of weeds out some of the high caseload for the commission as opposed to sending every demolition application for a building that's 50 years or older to the commission for a determination of significance. And I think I would say, you know, the planning department representative and the historical commission representative have 21 calendar days to make that determination. And there's a lot that goes into it. We, you know, and this is what we already do already. We contact, do all the research that we can on the property, look through the deeds, look through, you know, who's owned it, where is it associated with anyone notable in Amherst history? We contact Jones Library Special Collections to see if it's noteworthy in that way, and really just get a sense of the architecture, who's it associated with, and kind of its prominence in the streetscape. It's kind of the criteria we look at. So that kind of two-step process is a change that's being made where there's first that determination of significance outside of a public hearing, and then to determine whether a public hearing is required. And also it grants the commission time to really look deeply at the decision of whether to delay the demolition or not. So the public hearing will really focus on that bigger decision to place a delay or to not place a delay rather than the determination of significance. Let's see if go to the next slide here. So I would say the fourth major change that was made was the clarification of the definition of demolition, which you can look up in the dictionary certainly, but it seems like every town in Massachusetts has their own way of defining the word demolition. So as it stands now, and I don't have the text in front of me, but the definition of demolition is, you know, any act of, you know, raising, modifying, or, you know, or what is it? Any act of raising a building, and then there's this pesky clause which says or portion thereof. And so that, I think that clause has given the Historical Commission trouble probably since the bylaw was enacted in 1999, because there's no guidance given to the building commissioner or to the commission about how much of a portion of a building is warrants demolition. So I think that's been interpreted differently by different building commissioners over the years, and it sometimes results in, yeah, it's just vague in how it's worded. So we kind of worked through a process of really clarifying what the Historical Commission deems to be demolition. And so we came up with a 3-part definition to be more specific. So section A is essentially total destruction of a building. So complete and utter demolition, nothing remaining. B is kind of more partial demolition, which focuses on 25% or more of any elevation of a building. And so that can, you can imagine a historic house in Amherst. That would mean essentially removing a facade or a major part of a facade that really contributes to the architectural significance of the building. And then lastly, section C is kind of more focused on specific architectural features, like an important porch or a stoop or a chimney or windows that really have important, are architecturally significant and contribute to the building. And the Historical Commission wants the opportunity to ensure that the demolition of those structures or those features won't kind of really detract from the significance of the building. Now I think I'm gonna hand it over to Jen, is that correct?
Yep, my turn. Thanks everyone. I won't take much more of your time. I know that you have better things to do than listen to us, but We're calling this preservation of historically significant buildings instead of demolition bylaw. And this is where we really get to the crux in E, where we designate the building as preferably preserved. The key here is that not all buildings that are significant immediately invoke a demolition delay. They simply are listed as significant. And then we decide whether or not they might still, for whatever reason, need to get a permit to demolish. So if it's not reasonable to us, if we feel that this is a building that would represent a loss to the Amherst community, if we were to grant demolition authorization, even if it's in a poor condition now, we apply this designation, and then we weigh the factors that led to the building's designation as significant, including a continued, repeat review of sections D1 to 3, which you saw the significant standards, and work with the owner on their plans to consider reuse, reconstruction, restoration, or perhaps moving it. We help them maybe find somebody who would like to buy it and move it. We help them find grants that would help pay for the work that would need to be done. We look at every kind of alternative that is possible to avoid demolition. And we see this as not just for a visual, some sort of obscure visual preference for the look of Amherst, but really it's an economic advantage to the town. If you think of other towns that have been well preserved, like say Concord in Massachusetts, they have a similar size. They have famous authors as we do, although we have more. They don't have a large population of college-age residents, but they are a bedroom community for Boston. And they could have easily developed a dense infill of condos and apartment housing, but instead they kept a very strict preservation control for a long time. And they have seen their tourism increase radically. Their income, for instance, in 2016, their hotel tax income was $334,000. And in 2019, it was already at $865,000. It only has gone up as people have been interested in visiting historical towns. So we've been doing as much as we can to support this. For instance, the Writers' Walk signs was one of the things that should help people when they come stay and look around and learn more is here than just the Emily Dickinson Museum. But it also offers a chance to consider things like saving the old materials from a building that does have to come down and reusing them, or using the building for another purpose, of course. The concept of this environmentally friendly adaptive reuse is becoming popular, and it suggests that we never raise and replace, but we reuse as much as possible. It gives an economic value, but it also gives an educational value. So this paragraph is rather general because we have a lot of, if you will, subjective personal feelings about how something may or may not fit the criteria. But the key here is that it would be a loss to the town if the building were demolished. And then finally, some other things we considered for the bylaw, which, we struggled with many of these for months, but you won't see in there. For instance, a lot of towns have changed the building age to 75 years rather than 50 years before it is considered for a public hearing. And this clearly demonstrates a preference for colonial and 19th century styles. Yet in Amherst, we had a really big building boom in the mid 20th century. And we have some of the earliest examples of mid-modern architecture. We also have a visitor attraction of the brutalist architecture on the UMass campus, which may not be everybody's cup of tea, but it derives from architectural pioneers like Le Corbusier, and it's important to preserve. So we voted to leave the number at 50 years, and it does mean that we're getting more applications that come under our purview, and that's another reason we wanted to streamline the process. How long should the delay be? Many places vary it from 6 months to 2 years. We're sort of in the middle at 12 months. We've had it that way since 2005. We debated increasing it to 18 months in order to have more time to help applicants do research and help them find alternatives. But we were concerned that it would be a burden to developers and builders and have left it at 1 year. Should we increase the penalty? There is a penalty you probably noticed in there, which is if somebody demolishes before they get authorization or ignores the process of review altogether, there's a daily fee of $300. And this accrues until it's either replaced as it was or some other decision is made. We retain that amount as well because we're satisfied that it's pretty severe, even though it's not as much as it once represented. We also kept the old bylaw limitation that said that if somebody did violate the process, their opportunity to get a building permit would be held up for 2 years. They couldn't return for a building permit for 2 years. Can the delay still be listed before the 12 months has elapsed? Yes, and we listed much more carefully in the bylaw exactly how that could happen. A person can come for a second public hearing to show what they've done and how far they've gotten on alternatives and other plans, and we will lift the delay if it looks like there's no point in keeping it going for the full 12 months. And this wording is the same, we just moved it. So those are all the changes that we suggest. Most of the wording has simply been clarified. Things have been moved around to put them in the order in which they will happen in the process. And we are calling it the bylaw for preservation rather than for demolition. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone, all the presenters. Board members, do you have questions or comments about the draft of this bylaw and its move from zoning bylaw to the general bylaws? Any hands? Maria?
Thanks to all the presenters. That was really helpful. I think I was around for the 2015 version where I forget what we recommended, but you guys basically sort of kept working on it and revising. I don't think it was passed or approved, but I remember some of the issues from back then. And it sounds like you have addressed them pretty well in my mind, as far as, you know, we debated about the 50-year versus 100-year. And it sounds like that's kind of moot because of that more streamlined step you've added in where it'll first be determined whether it's worth an importance so that, you know, you aren't reviewing every house built in the 70s, but only, you know, ones like you were saying that have some sort of significance of some way, of some kind. So I feel a little more comfortable with that, you know, being only 50, because we had said maybe it should be a date instead of a time that, you know, moves as we move into the future, because hopefully we're doing good architecture now that will be worthy of preserving, but, you know, it's at some point, it's like, is it historical or is it, anyways. So I appreciate that. There was one of the slides, I don't remember which paragraph, but there's still a lot of subjective stuff in there. Like there's this word important and how you define what's important still is a little awkward in my mind, but maybe I honestly, I haven't read all the pages, but I feel like there probably are enough criteria you've put in to be able to define somewhat what is important versus not important. So I guess words like that always make me wonder, you know, important to who and what group and what, so yeah, that kind of jumped out at me. And I've worked on a lot of projects where local historic district that just popped up over at Sunset, suddenly, the owners were unaware that their parcel was, enveloped by this new sort of hurdle. And it definitely is a hurdle. It's not something that's just like, well, we'll make it as easy as possible. It really is for homeowners. Like, it's a daunting task. And so I do appreciate that you're very aware of that and that you've made the sort of time frame reasonable. But if it's cost prohibitive and they didn't realize their parcel was, in this district, it's just it's a difficult thing for me. I didn't fully understand it back in 2015 fully, as far as what it means to private property owners and this sort of extra sort of restriction in a way on their property. So I'm glad that you're being very careful about it and making sure that, we're preserving what's the best for Amherst, but at the same time, really think about homeowners, property owners, and just make sure that, this isn't a burden, because, when you take on renovation, it's already a big financial endeavor. And then suddenly, we've got to add more costs to do this extra step. And so, so anything you can do to help, homeowners and property owners with that is great. And it sounds like you have really been thinking about that. And I have no problem with it moving into the general bylaw. That makes a lot of sense. So, so none of those are really questions. I guess they're all just comments about, during your presentation, things that jumped out at me. But I appreciate all the hard work you put into it for the last few years now. And it sounds like you're sort of improving it. So I really appreciate that.
Jane, you are muted.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond very quickly to the last points you made, Maria. I appreciate your comments. The Historical Commission also wants to strengthen other kind of supplementary tools to aid homeowners and to make the process more transparent. So one of those is to update the inventory of historic houses so that just right up front, it's possible to know that, your house, if you want to make changes, you may need to consider this process of review. Second, is connected to that, and that's more PR about it. When we have appropriate lists, good lists, we can be more proactive in contacting homeowners at the outset. And then finally, I think homeowners or small property owners are, if they enter a project and they're kind of unaware of these conditions or requirements, what we would really like to have is available funding to assist them with whatever kind of research or evaluation or assessment would help them understand what the condition of their house is and whether that would be I think that would be a service that we could do were the funding available.
All right, thanks, Jane. Next board comment from Tom Long.
Sure, thanks. And thanks everyone for your presentations. I'm going to piggyback just a little bit on some of what Maria was saying and some of your comments, Jane, as well. I think I also do have a concern with, and it's not a concern, I actually really appreciate what you're trying to accomplish and it's very thoughtful. But I think like Maria, there's a lot of vagueness and subjectivity in what is preserved and what is not. And I think that the comment about cost is not just one of whether someone's making a renovation, but it's actually a piece of, let's say it's something they can't sustain on their property anymore, something that's falling down. And it has nothing to do with whether or not they want to make their house bigger or better or do something different. But again, yes, that you can support that assessment of that, but who's going to support actually keeping this thing afloat? And I noticed in the bylaw, there's this conversation about can it be moved? And those explorations I think are fantastic. But again, like if the end burden falls on an owner who didn't know that this was something that was significant until your commission said so, I find that to be that's a burden on the homeowners that I'd like to try to protect as much as possible. And again, I think you're doing a really good job of that, but I do think there's limits to what this law is actually saying to actually support them. So that's just one thought, and I think it's just piggybacking a little bit on what Maria was saying. But my other question about the shift from zoning to general bylaw, I guess I just need some clarification on what are the implications of that? And I guess I don't understand it enough to know what that means, and whether this moves out of someone's purview and into someone else's, or who doesn't have oversight over that. So I guess I'm just interested in knowing a little bit more about that as a board newbie. Well, not newbie, but relatively compared to some people.
Do any of the presenters want to respond to that? I will say I had a similar question, which is if the appeals are currently heard by the Zoning Board of Appeals, who would hear the appeals under this new regimen?
I can answer that if you like.
Sure.
The Pioneer Valley Planning Commission hears abutters or reviewers who are concerned. That's where the appeal would go. It follows the Massachusetts Legislature General Laws, Section 8. And since it's not a zoning question, it wouldn't really fit the zoning board anyway. It has to go to the regional planning agency according to Massachusetts law. And so since it would go there anyway, there's no reason to really have it go through the zoning process. And Ben, you can probably explain better why the placement was in the, I don't know, you weren't here either, none of us were here, in the zoning bylaw to begin with. Do you know?
I'm not seeing Ben's hand, but I'm seeing Chris's hand. Chris, do you want to comment on that?
So what I understand is that we were one of the first towns to adopt the demolition delay bylaw, and it was a long time ago. And when we did adopt it, we didn't really have models to follow. And the people who were working on it were familiar with the zoning bylaw, so they decided to put it into the zoning bylaw. And so that's how it came about to be in the zoning bylaw, in my understanding of the situation.
All right, thanks, Chris. Are there other implications of this that you could share with us that are kind of along the lines of what Tom was asking?
You're asking me?
I'll ask, you or Ben or Jane or Jan.
I wanted to kind of discuss something that Jan brought up. Jan brought up the issue of appeal, and we understand that the local district historic commission, I don't know if I said that correctly, but anyway, their appeals go to Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. But my understanding of this bylaw is that appeals would go to Superior Court. And perhaps we want to call on Rob Mora to clarify that, because he's more familiar with this type of appeal, having worked in other cities and towns.
All right, Rob, are you there?
I am here.
Hello,
Yeah,
Rob.
so I think that's the way we understand it is that we are not prescribing the appeals process that is included in the local historic district general bylaw. So by not doing that, the aggrieving party would file their complaint in Superior Court against the decision that's made by the Historic Commission. Of course, that's a decision that can be made now, as we move along with how we want this bylaw to come together. But I believe that's what was done up to this point.
Okay. And that, as I understand it, that's the appeal of either of step 1 or step 2. I mean, there's because not everything goes through the two-step process if the step one evaluation is unanimous?
I would say so. I mean, I think in either case, you know, an aggrieved person could file a complaint against the town for a decision being made at either level, and it would take that same process.
Okay. All right, Tom, I assume that's the extent of answers we're going to get.
That's fine.
All right. Janet, you've got the next hand.
I have a few questions and then sort of a long series of comments, but I'd like to start with my questions. First of all, I want to thank Ben for the comparison chart that really helped me see the changes, and so I could kind of track them more easily. And then I would love to help the Historic Commission end their 6-year odyssey on this bylaw. It looks like a lot of work went into it. And I listened to the meeting with Chris Skelly, which I thought was super informative, and it helped me understand what the Historic Commission was grappling with, like how that the old bylaw or the current bylaw worked for you or didn't work for you. So that what I found very illuminating, although a very long meeting too. And I thought Chris Skelly was excellent. So my questions are, well, kind of what Tom was asking. So my question was like, who appeals what, when, and who can appeal it? So it sounds to me like the Historic Commission decides, or somebody on the Historic Commission and the planning staff decide it's not significant. So that can go to the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission and then go to Superior Court. Is that the path?
I think what we've heard is that the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission is not involved, and that any appeal by anyone of that decision, whether it's the owner, the abutter, or some other party of standing, would go straight to Superior Court. Is that true, Rob? I see him shaking his head.
Yeah, that's correct.
So it's only inside of a local historic district.
Oh, okay.
That the appeal goes, that an appeal of the decision by the local historic district, not this decision,
Yeah.
would go to the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission.
Okay. And then Rob, could somebody appeal your granting of a demolition permit?
Yes. So
And
right. So the demolition permit, and that's what happens now under the current bylaw. In order to actually appeal the decision related to the demolition delay, they'd have to wait for the building permit, the demolition permit to be issued and appeal that, which would be heard by the Zoning Board of Appeals first.
And then they could appeal that. Okay, that helps me.
Janet, I'm seeing Jane's hand. She may have a comment on that particular
And
question.
just a quick comment. In this two-step plan, certainly step one or step two could be appealed, but step one is really only a declaration of whether the building is significant or not. And so there's not a threatening action, or there's not a, I think it's unlikely that that would be in practice, would invoke an appeal.
It would be when the permit was issued. Okay.
But there are instances where we only have step one. So if step one were to require the delay, for instance, the owner might appeal that. True? No?
Step one does not involve a delay. No delay is issued until you proceed through step two.
Okay. And if a decision is that the building is not significant, and who would have standing to appeal that?
Yeah, good question.
And a butter would, the next door neighbor could, take issue with the decision to not consider it a significant structure.
So it can't just be some sort of random interested person who's interested as a hobby, for a society for preservation of undistinguished mid-century houses.
I think that's a legal question. For
Yeah,
I think
so.
that standing issue is a sticky wicket, and it's there are cases all over the place. on
Okay.
that one. The other question I had was, what happens during the demolition? So the demolition delay is issued. Nobody can build for 12 months. And the Historic Commission sees this as a time for like, can we do a better plan? Can someone buy this property? Does somebody do we want to move it somewhere? But during that period, can the property owner apply for a building permit and just start going through the whole process of either the ZBA, the planning board, the building commissioner, and just have a second process going forward? Because it sounds like, I thought the answer to that was yes, because it sounds like if they get all their ducks in order that way, they could come back and say, can you just make this shorter because I'm ready to go? And that seems to be working against the 12-month purposes. Can that happen, or does during the delay everything gets static? The person reads, do you know what I'm saying?
Rob?
Yeah, during the delay period, everything does not have to stop. So the applicant can continue through all the other permitting, Conservation Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals. And now that we're disconnecting the demolition permit and the demo delay or preservably preserved certificate, they actually could apply and receive a building permit if they wanted to, go to that step. Of course, there's time limits to the building permit. It may expire and may not make sense to do that, but it doesn't stop their process with all the other approvals that are needed.
Okay.
And I think, Janet, rather, if they did that, they would probably just try to time it so that they were getting their building permit at the point when the delay expires, rather than coming back and trying to shorten the delay.
Does that sort of undercut the purpose of the delay, which is trying to work with the property owner on some other solution to how to preserve the building or the look or the porch or whatever? Doesn't that sort of cut against that goal? That'd be a question for Historic Commission people. They could.
Yeah, I'm going to invite Jan to comment on this too, but I think it actually works more in favor of, we were talking about homeowners. I think this is more applicable to homeowners than perhaps to developers who can be really inconvenienced by a lengthy, pointless delay. So I think it is encouraging to homeowners probably to allow the Historical Commission to work with them during that period to find alternatives. Sometimes the alternatives may be less about doing something different with the structure and more about doing something better with it. And I think the two procedures in that case would work hand in hand. Jan, do you have
I was just thinking with homeowners, we deal a lot with outbuildings, barns and other things that somebody mentioned, I think Maria mentioned, that they can't just always afford to keep something up. It's not that they necessarily want to get rid of it, they can't afford to maintain it. And often there isn't even a plan to replace it with a building. It isn't always about getting a building permit. Sometimes it's just about getting rid of something that's falling apart. And if we can find a grant, or we can find somebody who wants to buy the barn and move it or reconstruct it elsewhere, that kind of thing doesn't have anything to do with a building permit. And if they are building, they might be wanting to take, say, a porch off and put in a simple modern one. And if we can help them with funds or give them an idea of how to use the materials, that can work within their plans as they're proposing. It'll still be the same footprint, the same, essential item. It's just that we're trying to get them to reuse as much of the material and the look as possible. So I think what you're saying is true. It would be better for them if everything kept moving, but I don't think this will get in the way.
right. Thanks, Janet. I do see a couple other people that have hands. So why don't you do one more of your many questions and then we'll come back to you later.
The other one I think is a quick question. Chris Skelly talked about creating a list of significant properties. And is the Historic Commission looking at that as part of their, because if people knew their property was significant, it kind of helps cut to the chase a little bit. Are you putting that list together or thinking about that? Because I didn't see that in the bylaw. But
Yeah, that is a historical commission activity. It's not part of the bylaw and doesn't really belong there. We have there is an inventory of historic properties in Amherst that is, I think it's about 1,000 or 1,200 properties, something like that. Significant properties in Amherst are also entered into a state database, which is easily and publicly accessible. So the job of the Historical Commission really would be to update the inventory list. That was created, I think originally it was, well, the last time that it was really pulled together was the creation of the Amherst Preservation Plan. And the Historical Commission is in the next year or so updating that preservation plan. And, that's one of the priority activities in the plan.
We've also been working with the PVBC, the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, on a list of outbuildings, doing an inventory and very specific information for them. And they've been doing 100 at a time. I think there's 200 plus. And we've been every couple of years pulling money for that and helping do that list. So, and we would like to do more. We have a lot of ideas about what we'd like to have, but we just don't have the time, as I'm sure you all can understand.
All right, thanks everyone. Jack, why don't you ask a question or two?
Well, I'm a little bit on a sidebar. I don't know, Johanna had her hand up and then it went down. Maybe she should speak before me, but.
Well, if you mute yourself, we'll go on to Johanna. Okay, Johanna.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate the presentation, and I agree that the side-by-side is really helpful, and I feel like the flow of the bylaw is more logical and much more concise. So appreciating that aspect of it. I am still struggling a little bit to understand exactly what the experience of an owner of one of these properties would be. So I was hoping maybe one of you could actually just walk through kind of like the play-by-play of what the experience would be for somebody who, let's say, has an outbuilding that is torn down and they want to get rid of it, and just walk through what the process would be.
Ben, would you like to take that?
Sure. So somebody prepares an application. It's a $75 fee to prepare for a permit for demolition. Goes to the planning department. According to the new system, a member of the Historical Commission and a member of the planning department would look at what's being requested. And if it is something that is just a lean-to on the back of a house, or an old, I don't know, ice house that was rebuilt with cinder blocks or something, and they say, no, it's not significant, that's fine, then they get the permit. Sorry, my cat keeps walking in front of the camera. And if they do determine it's significant, then the owner is advised that it's going to go to the Historical Commission for public review. And we set a meeting date. All the timelines are in the bylaw. And they come to that meeting and they present their project to us.
I can't really.
And we meanwhile, there's been research done on the history of the property, the actual building, that kind of thing. Planning department brings that information to us. we've looked at it before the meeting. Many of us drive by it or, look at the photos or whatever and do our own bit of research. And then at the meeting, we listen to their proposal and discuss in front of them our criteria for what would, can make it significant on the next level, preferably preserved. And at that meeting, we determine, and so they know when they leave the meeting whether or not we asked for a delay or we granted them the permit. And then that's it. If it's a delay, then that they know that they can go on, as Rob said, but that's going to hold for a year unless they can follow the steps that we've suggested working with us for alternatives. And then if they find either that simply won't work, like they're trying to sell the building for materials, they're trying to get it moved, it isn't, or they do manage it, then they come back to us when they feel they're ready and we can lift the delay. Otherwise, it just runs the 12 months. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And then I have just one question about at the very front end. They would know that they are one of these places either because they've been notified by the historical commission or.
Well, when they go to get a building permit, they'll be told if they didn't already know. Is that right, Rob? He's gone. Ben?
I would guess that there's a few thresholds at the beginning. So first, if it's a building that's younger than 50 years, then it has nothing to do with us.
Yeah,
it just flies through the permitting pathway. I would say the first flag is if it's a building structure that's 50 years or older, and then if it meets the criteria of demolition, which we have that.
Or if it's in a historic district, that's the other obvious flag.
Yeah.
If it's in a historic district. But if it's older than 50 years, it's not going to be listed as significant. So it doesn't even, planning people and historical commission people don't even talk about it then.
But really, it's that building permit stage that kind of triggers the investigation on the part of the town of whether this would apply. Okay, great. Those are all my questions. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Johanna. I want to just ask, if it's in a local historic district, how does this process interact with the historic district's process? Because that seems like a kind of completely separate group with different appeal bodies and whatever timeline it sets for itself.
So as it stands now, with the current bylaw and the proposed bylaw, applicants in the Historic District Commission proposing demolition go through both processes. So it would be typically it's first reviewed by the local historic district commission because they have a bit more authority and are working in that smaller geographic area. And then the applicant would come before the historical commission. That's how it's been working and I guess there's maybe one or two a year where it's a demolition in the historic district and it comes before both bodies.
Okay, thank you. Chris Brestrup, you still have your hand up. Is that a legacy?
No, I wanted to address Janet's question about whether people can go through their land use permit process during the demo delay. And that is true, they can do that, but they can do it either with the current bylaw or with the new bylaw. It doesn't matter which one. So that's the question. That's the answer to that question. But I also wanted to address this process of going through the local historic district and the historical commission and just point out that the local historic district commission has absolute ability to refuse to allow someone to demolish something. And it's not a demo delay. It's like, no, you cannot demolish that. So presumably if they went through the local historic district commission first and that commission determined that whatever it is couldn't be demolished, then I'm not sure how useful or onerous or whatever adjective you want to use, it would be to go to the historical commission. They would probably still have to do it, but it may not matter. I mean, I don't want to make it seem as if the historical commission isn't very valuable, but the local historic district commission does have that authority to say, no, you cannot demolish this. Okay, that's
Okay.
it.
Thanks, Chris. Jack, we're back to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm glad that the historical commission is, leaning on and dependent on Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, because I think it's such a good group. They have a lot of expertise, so I was glad to hear that. But I guess just from my observation, it seems like Amherst has been, well, by virtue, mainly of Barry Roberts, very successful in terms of moving, historic buildings. And I'm wondering, and that has, I don't know, it just seems to me like that option has, happened more frequent than perhaps other towns for whatever reason. But I'm wondering how that figures in to the process. And again, it seems like, people are very, appreciative of the historic buildings. And if there's development that requires, demo, then that becomes very much an option. So I'm just wondering how that figures into the proposed, bylaw. And
Yeah,
Okay.
that is one of the options for to work out with a homeowner. There are examples that, moving houses was kind of a fairly common activity in the 19th century, and less so now. But there has been at least one case of where the historical commission reviewed an application for a house on South Pleasant Street, and after the historical commission heard that request, that's a time at which Barry Roberts came and moved the house. So it has certainly been it's one of the alternatives that the historical commission likes to explore with owners. So it's very much a part of the process.
It would happen more now if we had buried cables and wires. It happened more in the 19th century because there was nothing in the way. And now it's prohibitively expensive to get all those overhead cables and wires moved or cleared temporarily.
All right, thanks. Thanks, everyone. Tom.
Thank you. I just had a quick question. I was, Jan, I was listening to the flow of sequence and everything made sense. And I just had a question, and it's more general and it's maybe my own naivete, but the first thing you said was somebody submits for a building permit, right? And that's where the process begins, right? Essentially.
Well, the first thing I said was they apply for demolition. They make an application for demolition. It may or may not be simultaneous with a building permit, depending on what they know.
Okay. So my question is there a sense of a scale of things that one needs to know about, whether or not they can be demolished or not? So I have a small shed in my yard. Can I just disassemble that if I wanted to, or do I need a permit to do that? And I guess I'm just curious, like, do homeowners know that they need to see you before they take something down in their own backyard? And I guess, are there projects you won't have purview over because people aren't aware of that? So I'm wondering what the triggers are, or what that process looks like, kind of a little bit before that. Like, what's the awareness in that world, and what are the rules around demolition, not so much building?
Well, Jane, feel free to jump in, but a lot of people don't know that if it's older than 50 years, if it's visible from the street, if it's in a historic district or anything like that, that it would come to us, that they won't automatically just get a permit. A lot of people don't know they need a permit.
Right.
But that we want to do more press about this. We'd like to, once we get this bylaw, we were hoping to use it as a trigger to put some articles in the paper, saying did you know your barn is an important resource and we can help you save it? Or,
Yeah.
did you know that the look of your house contributes to, the viability of Amherst as a tourist destination or something like that? People don't necessarily think about that, but we would then have these rules, these breaking points listed for people to see, and hopefully it would lead to appreciation of the community, as well as maybe I can't just tear down my shed without asking, since it was built in 1920 and it's an absolutely gem of a little structure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I was just curious about process and awareness, and that sounds like a brilliant strategy and super helpful. Thank you.
Now, in an ideal situation, we could get inventoried and listed buildings onto property cards. And that would be, I think, really, really ideal and useful. The awareness question is a lot like, do people know that they need a permit to build a fence, or do they know they need a permit to cut down a bunch of trees? And
or replace their chimney on any house. Yeah. People don't know. I didn't know that. Who knows?
Right, I agree, and I do think that the project you described of putting together this database and mapping out these structures and making people aware ahead of time is I think a really thoughtful way of approaching this. Not that people are presented with surprises and that feel like roadblocks, and so I feel like finding ways to get ahead of that changes, as you're changing the language of this from demolition to preservation. I think getting ahead of it also changes the tone of this from being a roadblock to something to celebrate. And I think that's a useful project that I think should be front loaded somehow and get done soon. Thank you.
I like the way you shape it. You can help us write the articles.
All right, thanks, Tom. Janet?
So I went through this with I've combed through this several times. And so I have some very nitpicky, very specific corrections or points where I don't understand what something's happening. I don't really feel, I don't want to pull the whole planning board through it, but a few times there's like saying, see section F, and you go there and it's not the right site.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't exist. And so, so those kind of corrections, I would like to sit down with maybe Ben or somebody and just go through. But I also had other questions, like I was confused about like decision points, like, if the Historic Commission is meeting and they find the building to be preferably preserved, is that the day of the decision, or is it when they send their written decision to the applicant? Like, what's the trigger date for the appeal? And so the questions about timing, whether the building commissioner gets written notice, how you notify the public, not just the abutters, how can the town alert more people that, you're having your hearing? So I have a lot of things like that. And I don't know, I don't want to do that for the next 30 minutes, but it's kind of what I do as an attorney, is that kind of very specific language, or sometimes there were sentences or clauses that just didn't seem to belong there or confusing. And so I would like to offer that kind of level of detailed analysis without burdening the entire group here. But I do have so I'm not sure how to do that. That's my first issue. My second issue is I do have sort of broader comments that might be useful. And I know, is it more useful for me to send them to the Historic Commission or to Ben, or I'm trying to, I thought you should add streetscapes and neighborhoods to the purposes section, which is in the model bylaw for the Mass Historical Commission, things like that. Is that, how can I get you that information or comments usefully? Is it useful now, or?
Ben, do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, thanks, Janet. I do apologize. We found a number of mistakes in terms of how sections are referenced, and because we're adjusting to the new general bylaw format, I kept on having to change the way sections were referenced and numbered. So we have also found a lot of those mistakes. So I do apologize if that made it hard to understand. So I think, you know, we're happy to have you send us those inline comments or meet with us separately, but I'm certainly interested in some of your broader comments and questions, I guess, is how I would.
So here's my big three broad ones.
Yeah.
I like the old purposes section. I thought that that had so specific and covered so much. And I thought it was a very positive thing. So it's kind of my personal favorite and I would stick with it. I thought you should keep the Historic Commission as the entity to decide what's significant. And then in an administrative section, allow yourself to delegate that to one of your members and a planning board staff member. Because someday you may not want to do it that way, and that would give you the ability to go back and forth. It also said the language was, you know, a historic commission member and planning staff, which sounded like a huge group. And so that was a little unclear. But I thought that the administrative section from the Mass Historic Commission model bylaw was super useful, and you could give yourself some fluidity or ability to sort of change who the decision makers are if you change that. And then I did think the public needs some way to get notification. It could be on the town scroll, on the town webpage. And then I also wondered about timing issue. Like I know Chris Skelly was talking about the need to, for a lot of commissions like to hire independent consultants to determine what should be preferably preserved. And I wondered if there was enough time to do that, or is that the habit of the commission to consult an expert? It seems like the Valley is full of experts. They're all down the road in Deerfield. But is there enough time to have that kind of consultation? So I had timing questions too.
All right. Any of the panelists want to respond to that or just take those under advisement? Jane, you are muted.
Thank you. There are a number of comments and questions there, and I think it would be really helpful for you to share those with Ben and then with the commission, and we'll certainly look at them and look at the best way to prepare the bylaw.
I will take it neatly.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your looking at things in detail. I just have to say one thing is be sure you're looking at the most recent version, because you said streetscapes and neighborhoods was out of the purpose. It's in the first line. It may be that you're seeing an older, I know you've seen this a number of times and we've revised it over and over, but it is there. So just be sure. Okay, thanks.
All right, thanks, Janet. Johanna.
Last question, I promise. I was just curious whether homeowners or the owners of historic structures or those purchasing in a historic district are notified of that at the point of sale, just as part of the closing documents.
So in the historic district, which there's 2 historic districts in town, we send a newsletter every year to residents there. So we try to notify folks at least once a year in the historic districts, but for the historic structures scattered throughout all of Amherst, that we don't have a system of notification at this point. But
real estate agents will not tell you. They don't want to tell you, so we can't count on them.
Right. Okay. I don't see any more board hands. I see one hand in the attendees. And we've just passed 8 o'clock when we usually take a break. So I'm wondering whether we just listen to the public comment that we have and then have a short discussion about whether we're sort of finished with this item on the agenda or whether we want to continue after the break. All right, Kitty Axelson Berry, why don't we move her into the panelists so that she can make her public comment. Kitty, you are still muted. Kitty Exelson Berry, are you there?
Doug, that could be a legacy hand from her hand being up before.
Yep. All right. In that case, why don't we move her back to the attendees and we can take down that hand. We'll take a 5-minute break. I see right now it's 8:09. Actually, before we do that, let's just have a quick conversation. Do people want to continue this this discussion on this bylaw after the break or not? Can I see, just raise your hand if you want to continue the conversation. Not seeing any. Okay, so panelists from the Historic Commission and Ben, are there any other things you want to say to us before we conclude this discussion?
I just want to thank you again for your attention to the draft bylaw and for really appreciate your recognition that we've continued to work on it with feedback from a previous visit with you, and appreciate all your comments this evening. And we will continue to fashion this and shape it as can best serve the town of Amherst. And so Janet will appreciate getting your questions and comments also.
All right,
So
thanks,
thank you
Jane.
all.
Chris, I see your hand.
I just have a question for the board, which is, would you like to see this again before it goes to town council? Because what the normal course of events would be that the historical commission and the planning department would send it to the town manager to bring to town council, and then it would be referred back to the planning board and the CRC for public hearings. So you want to see this again before it goes through that process. And, it sounds like Janet had a number of things that she was suggesting that we may want to incorporate and, give you another draft to review before it goes to town council. So is that something that you want to do or not?
I'm seeing Janet shaking her head yes, I believe. Anybody else want to indicate? Or is that sufficient that we'll bring it back? All right, Johanna had a thumbs up on that. Tom, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, just a quick, so in Christine's outline, it's going to come back to us eventually, right? Is that, it's just going to go through
Through council and CRC.
council? Okay.
Well,
Yeah,
it would come back to you. I just wanted to point this out because last year we had some complaints about things going to town council before people on the planning board felt they were ready to go to town council. So
Right.
I'm trying to make it more, possible to have all of your things incorporated before it goes to town council. So that's why I'm asking this question.
Okay.
Mhm.
Johanna?
I think it makes sense to keep it at the planning board for a little bit longer before it goes to town council, so that ideally we send them as close to a finished product as possible.
That's good.
Okay, then why don't
Yeah, I'll
we
agree with that.
plan to do that? All right, thanks panelists. And we'll take a 5-minute break and we'll move on to something else when we return. The time now is 8:12. Please try to be back at 8:17 and turn off your video and mute your microphone while you're gone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, it's 8:17.
Doug, may I ask a question?
Sure, Chris.
I have this funny remembrance in the back of my mind that Andrew may have said something at the last meeting that he was going to miss this meeting. Did anyone remember that? I was looking through my notes, but I don't see a reference to that, but he's usually,
Yeah.
he usually lets us know if he's going to be here or not. Does anyone remember him saying he wasn't going to be here? No.
I don't remember. That was a long enough meeting that I was pretty well fried by the end of it.
Okay.
But regardless of whether he told us, he is not present. All right. So
Doug, I am finishing up dinner, so I'm going to turn off my video for a little bit.
all right. Thank you. And once we see that Jack's back paying attention, we'll resume. Hey, Jack, Gemsek, are you back? So Chris, is it allowed for us to continue? I mean, we've certainly had people that have had to leave a meeting and go on to other things, so.
We'll note when Jack returns. How's that?
Okay. All right, so why don't we resume? The time is 8:20. And we're moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 4. This concerns the drafting of a zoning amendment on large-scale solar installations, discussion by the board. So, Chris, do you want to maybe give us an update on the conversations in town hall and other places about where this stands with your process?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So there's a plan being developed for working on the solar bylaw and the solar site assessment. The plan is being coordinated with the town manager, Paul Bockelman, and assistant town manager, Dave Zomick. And so far, the plan is as follows. The solar site assessment will be kind of managed by Stephanie Ciccarello. She's the
Yes.
sustain. Yeah.
Jack has joined us. It's 8:21.
8:21.
Okay.
Jack
So
is
we'll,
back. All
sorry
right.
to interrupt you, Chris.
It's okay. So anyway, so the plan is as follows. The solar site assessment is going to be managed by Stephanie Ciccarello, who's the sustainability coordinator. And she's also the staff liaison to ECAC, which I always forget what that means, but I think it means Energy and Climate Action Committee. So she is currently developing an RFP to hire a consultant to work with the town on producing the solar site assessment. And that will look at land in Amherst to determine the best areas of town to site solar installations and where we do not want to site solar installations. The study will be based on numerous criteria, which will be developed by the town, by the public, and by the consultant in concert. The study will aid the town in creating a map of areas of town where we want solar and where we don't want it. We're hoping that it will result in a map in the form of an overlay district that can be incorporated into the zoning bylaw. And then in terms of the solar bylaw, we currently are planning for the planning board and the planning department to work on the solar bylaw, which is the way it really should be, informed by the work on the solar site assessment. The planning board members have been reading solar bylaws from other towns, and they've been given PVPC's Solar Best Practices Guide. The planning department will be drafting the solar bylaw and bringing it to the planning board for review and comment. And all of the planning board meetings are public meetings, so the public will be kept aware of where the planning board is with the solar bylaw. The planning department staff is going to be interacting, we interact on a daily or at least a weekly basis with Stephanie and her contacts with ECAC. In addition to that, Chris, me, and Stephanie are working on developing a charge for a working group to make recommendations to the town manager. So this would be a group that would be appointed by the town manager, and maybe it would have 5 to 7 members. And this group would be mainly overseeing the site, the solar site assessment. And it would also advise the town and the staff and the planning board on the solar bylaw. And we're thinking that the working group would have people on it who are very familiar with solar installations, but also familiar with some of the issues that are related to siting solar installations. So there are people over at UMass who are developing a methodology for municipalities and how to deal with solar installations. And we're hoping that some of them can, or at least one of them can be part of this group. So that working group would work in coordination with ECAC and the planning board and the planning department, and will seek public input as the project moves forward. We're envisioning that there will be several public meetings or public forums in which members of the public will be invited to give their input and to comment on the bylaw and the solar assessment as we proceed. And the aim is to finish this work in advance of May 2023. If the moratorium goes through, May of 2023 is the date on which the moratorium would expire. So we would hope to finish well in advance of that, but I can't really predict how long it will take to do the solar assessment. I can kind of predict how long it will take to do the solar zoning bylaw amendment based on last year's experiences, but hopefully it won't take 15 months. So that is my update. And I understand that Doug prepared a chart that he may want to talk about that compares what various towns and cities are doing with regard to solar bylaws. And I thought maybe we could use this time after you all make comments and ask questions, but I would be interested in knowing the kinds of things that the planning board members are thinking about and that you would like to see included in a solar bylaw. Now, obviously, this is a first conversation and you'll have time, in the future to add to your comments, but starting off writing this solar bylaw, I'm very interested in getting your input, because I assume you've read some of the material that we've sent out.
All right, thanks, Chris. Board members, anybody want to start off with thoughts? Do you want me to share my screen and show that chart I put together? I'm seeing one. Okay, well, I know Chris sent it to everyone. It didn't make it into the packet. Chris, is it reasonable to assume that you or Pam can add it to the packet when the packet is posted? Just so that the public has access to a copy?
I may have already done that. I just
Okay.
can't remember.
All right,
but
good.
yes,
All right.
you can make sure.
So why don't I share my screen? Let's see. Well, let me know how this.
I believe I have it too, Doug.
Oh, do you? So why don't you
think
go
so.
ahead and do that,
You want me
Pam?
to try? All
Sure.
right.
I think that might be better.
What I can't remember is whether it was a
It was an
Word
Excel.
document.
It was an Excel document.
This-
Not
you
a
see it?
not a PDF.
But isn't this it? Solar bylaw comparison? Can you
Yes.
see it?
Yep, that's right. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
All right. So, as I started looking through these, it seemed like several of the towns around us had very similar bylaws and probably used the same sort of, somebody did it first and then the other ones kind of adopted it and made their own changes. I was mostly interested in characteristics that were not directly related to the geography of the site. So I think I was thinking sort of in parallel with what Chris has described, that, these are the kinds of things we will want to talk about and certainly get input from the working group, but these are things that we probably have more input on than the extent of the overlay district. So I looked at the, just some of the physical characteristics and parameters that towns were putting on solar installations. And you can see across the top, I looked at the DOER template, and then at Belchertown, Hadley, Pelham, and Shutesbury's bylaws. So just going down the characteristics on the left, I just put the section in there so that I could find the solar section when I came back to it. Belchertown was unique in that they were limiting the area of installations to 20 acres, and that was the fenced area. And they didn't want to see forest clearing that was in excess of 10 acres. Pelham and Shutesbury had a map that created these solar districts. So they took their town and divided it into different districts, and then they indicated that maybe within each district there was only one solar array allowed. So whatever owner got their installation first, nobody else within that district was able to do it. Then setbacks, I think that's going to be a prime area of conversation for us. And, just as we've done with other zoning districts and uses, I'm sure there'll be a lot of conversation about that. So you can see that the DOE our template, which I can't remember, it might have just been sort of a, why don't you just threw a number in. I don't think they really thought a lot about what they put in, but they had small setbacks. The next smallest was Hadley, and then Belchertown, and then Pelham and Shutesbury had very large setbacks. And then there were special considerations for setbacks in particularly scenic parts of town, like in Hadley, where along Route 147, that was one of their scenic byways. So they had a greater setback. And then I think the other towns all had these other dimensions if the solar array was abutting conservation or residential land. I looked at the signage and, I don't think there's very much variation there. Visual distraction, Belchertown called out glare, and didn't want to see a solar array obstructing people's view on around a corner on a road, for instance. So that we might have some conversation about that. Pelham and Shutesbury wanted to see the fencing be black in color so that it recedes into the landscape. Everybody wanted their utility connections underground to the extent it was, reasonable to require that. And that would obviously have some interpretation. 3 out of 4 of the towns wanted to see 30 feet deep vegetative screening where they decided that it needed to happen. No, 3 out of 4 did not want to have herbicides used on plant control at the array. 3 out of 4 had this forest mitigation criteria that if you say your array was 10 acres, you needed to have another 40 acres that you set aside and agreed to leave intact as woodland. And then they all had the surety requirement to make sure there was money to remove the array at the end of the useful life, and which kind of was part of it being a temporary installation in the end. So that's really all I did. Much of the rest of these bylaws were very similar. I would think the planning staff could practically pick any one of them and use that as a template, because I didn't think there was a lot of other controversial stuff, but I'm sure we'll find other things that we can argue about. So I'll stop there. We can leave this on the screen if you want, but Tom, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. And thanks for this work. I didn't realize that you had gone through the trouble of doing this, which seems a bit laborious, and I appreciate it. Because my comment was that I think this really reflects that what we're seeing is some version of a template that is being constructed and reconstructed, then varied based on specific interests and conditions of the community around it, right? And so Chris asked, what would we like to see? And my thought was, I think we're going to see 90% of this be pretty boilerplate. What I'm most interested in is how do we deviate from that, and then a rationale as to why. Similar to the way we were talking about making changes from the old bylaw to a new, here's the rationale why we do that. I think if we can start with this boilerplate and get something really, moving, we can then really focus on some of the more hot button issues, Doug, that I think we want to touch on about, making sure we're dealing with issues of conservation and these notions are about forest clearing and, even setbacks and safety and, water conservation, or protection and all that stuff. I think those are going to be the kind of things we really need to focus on and have a rationale as to why we want to deviate from any one of these particular sort of best practices that seem to be presented here. So that was, I think Chris was asking, what do we want to see? I think that's the way I feel about it, that if we can get started with this really rough roadmap and then talk about how we deviate from that to meet Amherst's needs and the needs of our community.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Chris, I see your hand. Did you have a comment about that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, and I think I might have sent you some of these documents, but perhaps not. There are issues of what the values of your community are. And that's one thing that the working group is going to try to work on. And the values are things like, we have a climate action plan and we want to meet our climate action plan by X date. And so what do we need to do to achieve that goal? Or, we have a value of seeing beautiful scenes from the roadways. And are we disturbed by seeing solar arrays from the roadways, such as like Hampshire College's solar array on Bay Road? Is that something that people want to see? Hampshire College likes to have it front and center because they're proud of it. They feel like this is a really good thing that they did. Other people won't view it that way. So we need to have a community discussion about these things. We need to, talk about the value of, water and groundwater and stormwater and all of these things. And how do we control it? And how do we keep it from, damaging any of our resources? And so, one of the documents that the, what was it? I think it was the town council, or maybe it was the CRC was looking at, was a kind of a 5-part process to work through some of this. And the first part of the process was setting up what are your community values that you want to work towards. So I think that's an important piece.
All right, thanks, Chris. Janet.
I want to piggyback on everyone's comments. I definitely think that it's great to work off a template. I'm not sure that these, 4 or 5 towns would be the template. I mean, obviously they have lots of different factors that we're going to need to consider. I always think like, what are the best practices, or, what are the issues we want to cover, which is what Christine was just talking about. And I actually, I didn't read every page of the very, very long AFL document that you sent us, Doug. I appreciate this comparison chart because it's super clear. I thought the AFL report and, bylaw and process, which I think they did with Tufts, was a great template because it is kind of walking you through your values and saying you could do this or you could do that, or here's some language if you want to do this. And I actually thought that would be a really good template to start working off of, like, what do you want to protect? Where do where's your preference for where you want to cite things? And so, I just thought that AFL example was an example of good process, but also sort of opening up the whole discussion of different bylaw. They had language, but they also kind of said you could say this or you could say that. And working through that bylaw or using that as a template process would be really instructive, because we're going to Ethel was concerned about scenic views a lot. We're going to be concerned maybe about, freshwater wetlands, things like that.
But wouldn't you consider that a template for a solar study rather than a template for a bylaw?
But if towards the back of that huge document, they did have bylaws, they had bylaw language.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was a great document, and I read through it, it's been several weeks ago now, but it did seem like it got at a lot of the decisions and values that we would probably want to talk about.
And I think we're sort of confronted with, how do you write a bylaw as you're doing this values process of the solar assessment, And so, maybe we can use that as a skeleton and, be thinking about language. One of the things I'm really interested in is, can we have solar on farmland and still use the farmland for grazing or growing crops? Like, that would be my preference. And so I did some research in that, and people are doing that. And so that might be in our bylaw saying, yeah, they have to be high enough or far enough apart that you could, actually raise crops or, grazing animals a little easier as long as they're short. Those kind of things I think we could add in, but you're only going to add it in if you want to add it in.
Well, I guess that raises another topic that's sort of in the back of my mind, which is the state legislation that has basically says you can't have you really can't do very much to limit where solar installations go unless it's for public safety, health, and welfare or something like that. And so, some of these provisions in these adjacent towns, strike me as maybe not even holding up to a lawsuit. And I guess, so that's one question. And then, for some of these towns where you've got 4 times the land required to be set aside, there's an economic implication to that. And so in a way, we're setting up the parameters of the next generation of public utility. And how much do we want to be spending on electricity? And, is that amount of charge or, societal resource to generate electricity affordable to the poorest among us? And so there's a social justice aspect to it. So, I mean, this seems like a really kind of a big question, and I'm not sure we have all the expertise to do it, but I hope our consultants can help us. So let's see, Chris, I see your hand.
So one of the big things I think we need to think about is what is going to be the tone of our bylaw. Is it going to be a tone of welcoming solar arrays and installations and trying to figure out the best place to put them and how to deal with them? Or is it going to be kind of a punitive or, exclusionary, or, we don't want you here, but if you have to come here, this is what you have to do. And I think, we have to talk about that attitude, because I think, there will be people who will push us in the direction of the punitive and the, highly restrictive. And I think, based on our climate action goals, that's not really a direction that we should be moving in. So this is, we need to have this conversation out in the open and resolve at least what the planning board thinks about this. And hopefully we can also, hear from the public and try to resolve what Amherst thinks about it.
Great. Johanna.
Doug, I really appreciate you sifting through the different bylaws and coming up with this comparison. The one data point that I keep pining for, and maybe I'll do this myself, is looking at the current bylaw that we have that guides energy siting in Amherst and just seeing how it stacks up to these. Because let's say we do nothing, that would be kind of the baseline that we're operating from. And it would be interesting to see how it stacks up.
Yep. Well, I think, I actually thought about putting a column in for what we have now, but I realized that, I didn't get very far into that. I did this fairly quickly, and some of these, may not be quite perfect. I may have been moving too fast, but it struck me that, we have different setbacks, for instance, required in different districts already in town. And the solar installations are allowed in multiple districts. So there isn't one set of setbacks, for instance, that applies to a solar array. And in fact, I guess I'm not even clear on whether a setback intended for a building structure would even apply to a setback for a solar frame or panel. So I didn't get very far with that. And, I also thought I did go back and look at what Chris and the staff answered when we asked what the Zoning Board of Appeals has required on the arrays that have been put in town so far. And I don't think I saw any uniform setbacks in that response. So, I'm happy to share my document with you, and you can add a few more columns to it, Johanna. I think we could take this off the screen? I think we could. I hope everybody's got it, and we can add to it or whatever as we see fit. Chris?
I just wanted to say that we do adhere to the dimensional requirements of the zoning bylaw, and we consider that the solar arrays are structures. So
Okay.
we require that whatever setback is required in the particular zoning district. But at the same time, we hear from residents and, abutters about what their concerns are. And if they think that the setback needs to be greater, then the zoning board or the planning board would hear that and then make a determination based on that. So they don't necessarily strictly stick to the setbacks, but at least they have sort of a benchmark to start with.
Okay, great. Other comments? Okay, well, then I guess, Chris, you had asked about the tone that we want to take. And at least my inclination would be to be as welcoming as we could be. I think we have a lot of ground to make up. It's been 30 years since I first heard about climate change and global warming. And it just feels like we're finally getting traction on the technology being feasible enough, and enough people being worried and motivated to do something about it, that, gee, we're finally getting some action, and that's good. So, hopefully it's not already too late, since the climate we're living in today is probably based on the carbon count from 15, 20 years ago. If we did nothing, if we emit no more carbon, it's still going to get hotter for a while. But I'll try to be optimistic about all of this. So I'd be as welcoming as we could be, and only exclude solar installations where public health, safety and welfare are clearly at stake. So things like water resources would be, a prime example of where I'd be very careful about what we're doing. But I'm personally less worried about the view, and I think the economics is something we need to think about, or at least be aware of, even if we don't have really very good information. Personally, I put solar on my house, and I saw how much that cost. And so I do think that there's an efficiency from having fewer, larger arrays, rather than all of us putting $25,000 worth of solar work on our roofs. But I recognize that every little bit helps. So, but I don't know that that's a very efficient way to meet our need. And I don't even know if there's enough roofs to do that. And hopefully the solar study will help us understand that. So that's probably my 2 cents for the moment. Jack, I see your hand.
Yeah, you mentioned water resources. The Water Supply Protection Committee met last week, and we are going to, do a little bit of do a white paper. Myself and Brian Yellen and maybe others will be looking at the impact of solar on water resource aspects. But my personal experience has been that the solar arrays do not bring on hazardous materials. That's the number one concern with regard to leaching and things like that. And I think we all are understanding how important the construction phase of these are. So for me, having a very strong stormwater pollution prevention plan is important. And that I really like the idea of that third-party inspector being there as being someone independent, making sure that the the SWIP, as we call it, is properly implemented, because that's the most critical phase of the whole operation. Subsequent to it, the installation of a solar field, you're whether it be within a forested or an agricultural area, it's a grassland basically. It's not a paved area. It's panels above soil and grass, so it maintains a grassland sort of environment with from a hydrologic hydrology perspective. But certainly the construction phase is the most critical, and but I think that the water resources thing is something that has kind of got blown out of proportion. And again, I just looking at your chart, one more thing, I feel like Pelham and Shutesbury are a little bit of outliers with regard to the offset. The 500-foot offset there seems a little bit untenable, especially compared to the DOER and what other towns have been doing. So I'm wondering, I'm not sure we would want to focus too much on those two bylaws. So thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Johanna, I'm going to call on you next, but I want to, since Jack mentioned the towns that he wasn't sure we should follow, particularly Janet mentioned she wasn't sure those were the towns we wanted to follow, and did mention the Athol study. But I think it might be good for all of us to think about taking a few minutes and looking at other towns. I haven't looked at Northampton. I haven't looked at Newton. I haven't looked at Arlington. All of which are much more developed. So if they don't put it on roofs, they've got a problem. So I don't know what Lenox has. So maybe we need to find some other relatively affluent towns with lots of open, undeveloped land, and look at them. I guess one other thing that just occurs to me is that we have a high percentage of our land that the town has purchased and put into conservation land. And so there might, we could either decide to just completely exclude solar from all of our conservation land, or we could say, well, we can do that in some areas where they're not highly sensitive habitats. So I think that's one conversation, that whether, somehow we need to get at that too, because when I looked at the map that Cinda Jones sent that showed how her properties related to the developed land in Amherst and the conservation land, it was pretty striking how much conservation land there is. So if you take that away and you take all the developed land away, you're not left with very much. So I'll stop there. Johanna.
Thanks, Doug. I'm appreciating you sharing all your thoughts. I agree with you that I think we need to be welcoming of solar rather than punitive. That needs to be the tone of this. I do think rooftop solar has a special role to play. It's unlikely to meet all of our energy needs in town, but there are benefits to producing solar close to where you need it that are very real, in the avoided transmission costs, the lost leakage of power during transmission, and then they're just like resiliency benefits too. I mean, we haven't had a lot of blackouts and extreme weather events here, but I know in places like Puerto Rico and wildfire ravaged California, people are really looking to rooftop solar coupled with energy storage as a way to, maintain power in a more and more unstable world. And then even like connecting those with microgrids so that like one neighborhood that loses power or that doesn't lose power can share power, with other neighbors. I don't think our bylaw is going to accomplish all of that, but I do think, I mean, Amherst has a history of supporting rooftop solar with the various Solarize programs. I'm honestly not up to speed on where our community solar program is at. But I do think we should be encouraging rooftop solar as much as we can on the local level. And then I do think that I'd be interested to hear, well, I guess from folks in the solar industry about how much town by town variations in the bylaws affect their ability to, I don't know, do business efficiently, and how important it is to kind of try to streamline that on a regional level, or whether, we should, like, who cares what Hadley's doing? Let's just figure out what we think is best and do that. And then I'm also, I don't know, I mean, I guess this is probably a function of needing to build the bicycle while we're riding it when it comes to the clean energy transition. But I am struck by the overall lack of guidance from, I don't know, PVPA or, some of the almost countywide entities. A couple of weeks ago, I was ice skating with somebody who's a planner for Franklin County, and she said towns are constantly coming to her saying, how should we do solar? And they don't have the resources to offer coherent guidance. And so, it would just be, we're going to need that. Okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Before I call on you, Jack, Johanna, since you mentioned residential areas, it also occurred to me that, at least based on my experience with the size of the array on my roof and how much of my energy that generates, there is some sort of ratio between, how many houses an acre of solar arrays would support. And, it might, let's say it's 25 houses. So, if we went out into some of the larger subdivisions in town, I forget the name of them, but, would we be okay with every 25 1 acre lots? We'd be okay with a 1 acre solar array. And that, then that community has done its part, could be isolated from the rest of the town. And, if there's a battery, then they probably could generate a sizable proportion of their energy. So I'm not sure I really, the more I've thought about it, I'm not sure I really want to exclude solar from residential areas. And another kind of thought was, we have high tension lines that run through Amherst right now. And a pretty sizable part of that route is owned by Western Mass Electric. It's about 150 feet wide. And, maybe we ought to be talking to Wamiko about putting solar arrays under their high tension lines. I don't know if they've thought about it, but, we should be pushing them to think about it. But some of that cuts right through residential areas. Would we be okay with that? We've got people living next to high tension lines now, and they knew that when they bought it. So, Johanna, I assume you're done, and you'll take your hand down when you're finished. Jack, you're next.
Yeah, Doug, what a great idea with regard to the transmission line and just, the right of way, it's there. They have to keep vegetation down as it is. So it requires maintenance, very good idea. And I'm wondering, if your original thought there, you should get credit for it. But no, that is very good. I was going to say, like, when the Massachusetts came out with their incentives for developing solar they knew they didn't want to get forest. They didn't want to take up agricultural land, and they prioritized brownfields, number one, which included landfills, to the extent where they were giving 30% like credit for those types of things. And that was a make or break thing in terms of getting credits from the state, for those areas. But the fact of the matter is that those areas are extremely limited. And so, we're not going to meet our objectives. I think I see Steve Roof as a participant here, but I think, we need 200, 300 acres of additional solar to meet the goals. So that's just not going to happen, in parking lots and rooftop and things like that. So we have to, utilize, what we have, and I think there's some controversy with regard to forest versus solar, which one has, the lower carbon footprint. I think Steve Roof would say that, most definitely, solar is going to, come out on the positive side versus a forest. And again, we're looking at 10 or 20 acre developments here, but I just wanted to say that that's why there's pressure on additional, on this development on areas that are, considered like, natural resource areas, and they're not protected necessarily, but you kind of have to venture into, areas that we see when we're driving outside of Amherst, farmlands and forests that have been cut. So that's why that's happening. There's the need, and it's just, it's where solar developers have to go to because there aren't any alternatives, feasible alternatives.
All right, thanks, Jack. Chris, Johanna had mentioned, gee, it'd be interesting to hear from some solar developers about some of the economics and the obstacles that different towns present. I think, there is that developer that had proposed the project on Shutesbury Road that we could probably track down. And then there's people like PV Squared who are local suppliers. And I don't know what their experience is with ground mounted installation, but I wonder whether we want to start to reach out to people who might bring a particular perspective, a wide variety of perspectives, and whether it's proper for us to do that, or whether it's something the working group would be doing, or would it be part of the solar study? So I guess we don't need to decide that tonight, but I think it's something to think about, is how do we gain some of the perspective of people who are quite knowledgeable, and some of them will not agree with a lot of people in town, but we're kind of building a new thing here. Chris, I see your hand.
So that was one of the ideas that Stephanie and I had for the working group, that we might bring in. I think there are two people that we know about. And one is that attorney who wrote the article in the Gazette a month or so ago.
Sarah Matthews.
Yeah, and she works for developers of solar arrays, and she might bring a good perspective. I think she lives in Amherst.
Mhm.
And there's another person who is involved in solar development whom Stephanie knows about, and we were thinking of contacting those two people and seeing if they would be interested in being part of the working group, because that's knowledge that we don't have, and forest ecologists don't have, and groundwater people don't have. And, we need to know this because it relates to how close these things need to be to the grid, and do they need battery storage, and where does the battery storage go? Does it go in the middle, or does it go on the road, or all these different things that we don't know anything about, but people who are involved in the developments do know about. So I think that's a good idea to bring those people in. And, we can talk about whether the planning board would like to have them, one or two of them come and talk to the planning board about things from that perspective. So yeah, it's certainly on our radar screen. Yep.
Okay, good. I mean, we don't want to demand so much time from them to talk to a lot of different bodies.
Mhm.
So, if the right place for them to make their contribution is the working group, I'm not sure I would personally insist that they came to us, but I'd certainly want to know that there was a wide variety of representation in what the working group brought to us. Janet, you're next.
Just reaching back to something you said earlier about the standard, the state, the regulations have to be reasonable, and you can have regulations that promote the public health and safety. Those are really squishy, and so that pretty much, I think it gives us free rein to do what we want as long as it's not really out there, because the public welfare is obviously a very general concept, and there's lots of positives to scenic views or environmental stuff, or open fields for children to run into, things like that. So you could pretty much, as long as you have a reasonable basis for it and it makes sense to most people, you're going to get through. We seem like the state law requires that some things have to be by site plan review, but not everything. And so we could have special permits for different things. So I don't think that state statute, it's not going to be like a legal tether controlling regulations. The question I think for us is, as a community, what do we want to regulate? I do want to always focus on the positive, and then of course bringing the doomsday scenarios, because that's what lawyers do, and we deal with the doom. And so I would be really interested in hearing about what are actual problems that have happened at solar facilities, large and small, probably on the larger side. And I was doing some research in that, and it really depends on where you are. And so I think that's kind of important, like one of the giant facilities they have in the Mojave Desert, they actually produce this incredible sort of heat vortex. Like they try to consolidate and bring heat to heat up the oil or, the steam or whatever, but they're producing a tremendous amount of heat, because only 25% of that, the solar rays are used. And so those are really negatives, not just for the ecosystem, but actually turn out to be sort of heating up the planet. And that's not going to be our problem in New England, because we just don't have that weather. But I was really interested in, like, when people from the public were talking to us about what happened with the cranberry bogs, I thought, I have no idea what they're talking about. Like, what was the impact on this wetland? Is that something that we have to worry about in terms of our wetlands and things like that? And, if we're monitoring, what are we monitoring against? Like, or if we're writing laws, what are we trying to prevent? What problems are we trying to prevent happening? And until I know what those problems have been, I don't really know what to write. And, one of the issues I had was the batteries. If there are large batteries on a facility being stored, batteries, when they start burning, they're filled with hazardous materials. And when they start burning, they have to be heated, they have to be cooled, they're temperamental. If they start to burn, they're really hard to put out, and it'd be really hard to contain what's coming out of them. And I don't know if our fire department would be equipped for that. And so that's a kind of problem that I would, mostly because of my husband, this is my husband's field. But I had also watched this long thing about Teslas burning up houses in California when their batteries spontaneously combust. And I was like, oh, this is a good thing for not having a garage. So those are the kind of problems I think, we need to foresee happening, and, write regulations or controls, foreseeing that might happen. Like if we have a battery out in the field in a forest and it starts to burn, what then? How is that handled, or how is that contained in terms of its discharge and stuff like that? So that's the kind of bummer legal stuff. But I do really think we should also focus on, like, how to encourage solar where we want it. And that would be good to talk to people from PV Squared about, what's successful. There's an actual 1 acre lot in front of my house, and I was just thinking, well, we could just fire up and, put panels there, and Valley View would be covered. And I think the idea of the Wamego lines is fantastic. I've been walking under those lines because they're upgrading they're huge. It's huge open space. and it cuts through Amherst and you don't even know it. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Janet. Jack,
Yeah, just, Janet brought up the wetlands, and I do think that the existing, wetland, bylaws or would be, are going to be protective. I mean, of any sort of development. I think a solar field, compared to, like a parking lot or, residential development is going to have, much less impact, but, definitely you're going to want to, be protective during that construction phase. And then thereafter, just, make sure, it's going to be protected. But I think we have a 100-foot buffer. Some areas 200 foot because of the Rivers Protection Act. Those are, I think, I don't think we need to override those for solar, but we definitely need to, incorporate that. And the battery thing, actually, yeah, that's something I'm wondering, like, these bylaws, do we take in, do we include, sections for battery? Do you want to, sweep in, like, wind energy, into this sort of thing, and kind of have it all encompassing for, for energy type things, but the battery one is a little bit of something that I'm not familiar with that I would like to get more information on, for sure.
all right. Thanks, Jack. So we're almost at 9:15, and I made the perhaps rash statement earlier that I hoped we didn't go to 10:30. So I'm wondering, we probably ought to provide for some public comment if people want to speak to what they've heard this evening. And we also hoped to have at least a brief conversation about where we stand with some of the zoning proposals that we were working on last year. Chris had an update spreadsheet for that. And then I think that was the end of our formal agenda of particular, expected items. So I guess I'm wondering, maybe we do public comment now and do another maybe 10 to 15 minutes of board conversation if we need to. I think, Chris, you might think about whether you've heard enough to get started this evening. And then we move on to our regular closing items and try to finish up, say, 9:45 or probably 10 o'clock by the time we're done. Does that sound okay? Yep, lots of nodding heads. Good. Okay, so why don't we go to public comment at this time? I'm hoping that all 18 of you don't need to speak for 3 minutes. And in fact, Pam, why don't we try 2 minutes just to see if people can be a little bit more concise. All right, thanks. Okay. All right, so we'll start with Michael De Chiara. Why don't we bring Michael in, and Michael, please give us your name and your address.
Yep, Michael De Chiara, actually 56 Pratt Corner Road. I live in Shutesbury, but I'm on the Shutesbury Planning Board. So a couple of quick points. One is just an observation. I want to commend you guys. Reflecting on a few meetings ago where it seemed like there was a discussion about you don't need a solar bylaw. I think you're discovering the complexity of solar. So that's great. Doug, I liked your graph. I just wanted to give you some accuracy. So for Shutesbury and Pelham, for Shutesbury, the limit size is 15 acres, but Shutesbury and Pelham are probably hidden in the definition section. It's not in so it's there. I've always thought it's a weird place to stick it, but, and Pelham copied ours, so that's probably where theirs is as well. The other thing I would just say, I think I mentioned this, but in December, I went through and looked at all the solar bylaws that were available online in the state, and there's 206 towns and cities that have them. Shutesbury and Pelham, it sounds like you're not going to follow ours, but we are outliers. There is sort of a template. There's a whole bunch of them that are very vanilla. And if you start searching through, you'll start seeing them pop up. The last thing I would just say is in terms of batteries, it sounds like you're addressing batteries. Batteries are, they were called out specifically in the PVPC report for best practices that it can concern. If you look at existing solar bylaws, they're not there. The SMART program is just requiring them, in the last year or so. So every SMART funded program is going to have batteries now, but pretty much all the bylaws that are in existence don't have them. Shutesbury is developing an energy storage bylaw, regardless of any energy generation source that will do. So just when you're looking, you probably won't find it, but it sounds like you're on top of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And I'll look for the definitions in your bylaw for the areas. All right, next we have Phil Rich. Please, let's move him in and get your name and your address, and we'll reset the clock to 2 minutes.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, Phil Rich, 187 Shutesbury Road in Amherst. I'm in a butter to one of the proposals, the app Cole's proposal. I'm just concerned, I've heard the word punitive a couple of times now. Not quite sure what that's about. I don't think the concern is intended to punish solar development. It's just the opposite. It is intended, however, to make sure that it's prudent and safe and has really no long-term detrimental effect either on the land or the ecosystem, also on the neighbors in the town. I'm one of those neighbors to one of these proposals. And so I'm hoping that the bylaw will take the time to take everything into consideration without being punitive, but being prudent. And again, that includes ensuring the well-being, I can't think of a better word, of people who are immediately abutting the access road and the development of a commercial installation itself. So I'm interested to hear what that term punitive, it's been used at least twice. So I certainly want to get off, would be interested if there's any time to hear what people mean by punitive. That's it for me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Phil. We'll have to think about that. All right, next we will have Steve Roof. Steve, we need you to give your name and your address again.
Yes, good evening. This is Steve Roof. I'm in South Amherst, 1680 Southeast Street. I am a member of the Energy and Climate Action Committee, otherwise known as ECAC. I'm also a professor, a researcher of climate change for about 40 years. And in the last 10 years or so, doing a lot with renewable energy development. I'm not quite sure what to say. I hoped to be in the group that helps develop this bylaw going forward. I think what I'll say now is that I like what you guys said earlier, that a lot of this is going to come down to values. Mm-hmm. There's some technical aspects that we can work out. There's data, there's facts, we can work that out. But there's a lot of value judgments that have to be here. And there's always a lot of concern when we're focusing on solar. What are the impacts of solar? How's it going to affect the groundwater? How's it going to affect the view shed? How's it going to affect the wildlife, the forests? I just want to, emphasize that we can't just look at the impacts of solar, because what we're really trying to do is figure out how to become carbon neutral and how to stop burning fossil fuels. So whenever we look at the potential impacts of solar, we have to compare those to the impacts of burning fossil fuels. If we don't do solar, we're going to be burning more fossil fuels. And those fossil fuels are burned in low-income neighborhoods throughout Massachusetts. They have huge impacts, health, economic and impacts, ecological impacts from their pollution, in addition to the greenhouse gas impacts. So let's not focus on solar by itself and look at all the bad things of solar, but let's always compare the solar benefits and impacts to the benefits and impacts of fossil fuels. So thank you, guys.
All right, thanks, Steve. All right, next we'll have Eric Bachrock. Please give us your name and your address.
Thanks so much. Eric Backrack, 277 Shutesbury Road. I'm hoping that the usual elements of that will be considered by for solar bylaws, such as site placement and size, design, construction, et cetera, monitoring, and ultimately removal, that those will not only be that other aspects will be integrated into the consideration for solar bylaw, for the solar bylaw. I'd hope also that several things other than those would be considered, such as number one, the Amherst Master Plan of 2010 calls for land conservation by keeping critical tracts of the highest quality habitats identified, undeveloped, and permanently protected. Second, the master plan also calls for the identification and permanent protection of lands buffering Amherst water supply, its wells and reservoirs from development. I'd hope that the committees and boards working on this law will work together along with the town council. This might include the Amherst Conservation Commission, Water Supply Protection Committee we heard about, the Amherst Health Department and boards. They have the sole jurisdiction of governing and regulating quality of private wells. I would hope that an in-depth critical analysis of where LSAs have gone wrong, gone bad, such as ones located in Williamsburg and Conway, and why they did. The issue of battery storage we've already talked about, and those are so critical. Then when we take down forests, ultimately, we understand that what we are losing their highest and best use purposes. Drought resilience, protection of wildlife habitats, protection of clean water, flood storage and management. By deforesting, we also release all the carbon that has been stored for many, many decades. I hope that we make wise decisions in the town and that we do not jettison our local ecology and irreparably threaten the balance of nature. Thank you so much for considering my comments.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, next we have Dorothy Pam. Dorothy, if you'd give us your name and remind us of your address.
Okay, Dorothy Pam, 229 Amity Street. And I was surprised when you said you'd been thinking about climate change for 30 years, because I remember the 70s and it was big and all the school children were taught about it and they came home and they cried and everyone was upset and then nobody did anything, okay? But it was really, really big there for quite a bit. So after listening to the items you've discussed today, I just think, how could anyone have not wanted a moratorium? This is complex, and you have discussed so many issues that have to be looked at, examined, studied, and decided on. And I know you've got a lot of experts already, and I'm thrilled that you're going to be drawing upon people from the university. And I know there will be trade-offs. Nothing will be perfect and satisfy everybody, but I think it's great to go into this having done the best you can, of thinking about things ahead of time and trying to do things in the best way possible. So I really do applaud you in all your work. So thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. And it looks like our last public comment will be Lenore Brick. Lenore, please give us your name and your address. Pam, would you reset the clock? Thank you.
Hi, sorry, Lenore Brick, 255 Strong Street. I might need 3 minutes. As we start this process of drafting the solar or renewable energy law, I would like us to challenge some of our assumptions. Please do not assume that large-scale solar installations have all gone well. There are examples of severe damage from projects all over the state, the region, the country, like in Wareham, Plymouth, Williamsburg. And these towns were not inferior to Amherst planning boards, and some of them had solar bylaws. Please don't assume that solar companies are equipped to understand the impact on the ecosystems or to anticipate long-term consequences. Please don't assume that the town solar bylaws that you're looking at were created, informed by this influx of foreign corporations coming into Massachusetts because of our state subsidies. And that is the reason it's happening on green lands, not just because there's not enough room on built landscape, but because it's more profitable. Please don't assume that there's adequate oversight. The state agencies have not been enforcing that. So who's going to do that here? And we can provide documentation on all of this. Please do not assume that our town's fair share of generating solar energy is, as the state and New England starts to look at regional approaches, let's incorporate that also. And please do not assume that large-scale installations are the only and best way to address climate and biodiversity collapse, because it is a man-made technology. It is substituting for fossil fuels, which is great, but it's not a substitution for nature's technology, which through the miracle of photosynthesis takes the sun's energy and converts it to carbon matter, which is our food and which perpetuates life on Earth. Our technology and our laws are not perfect and they'll keep changing, but nature's laws have been in place before we were here and will continue to run the show after we're gone. And I thank you for your time and efforts, and your conversation was very interesting and very thorough, and I look forward to you doing that more and more. Thank you.
Thank you, Lenore. Eric Bachrach, I see your hand up again. If that is not a legacy and you do want to speak again, Pam, can we give Eric 1 more minute?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, it's not Eric, it's Renee Moss. I'm his wife. So we're just using the same computer.
Oh, I see.
Okay, right. I don't have much to say. I just want to add one thing. And, again, as people before me have said, to thank you for the work you're doing around this. But just in hearing the conversation this evening, I had one concern around, I think that I understand the importance of getting input from developers and people who do this work, but I hope that we will also get input from forest ecologists and people who represent a different perspective. As Lenore said, things are in motion. This is science, and we're discovering new things, more research, et cetera. And there is a perspective that that the carbon sequestration plus the carbon that escapes when you take a forest down has more detrimental effects in the long run than putting up a solar array. And I know there's different perspectives on it, and I hope we get all of those perspectives when we consider this. And once again, thank you so much for giving it the attention you are. And I'm confident that the town will move forward and have a good bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so board members, any more discussion for this evening? Chris, do you think you've heard enough from us to sort of take a first pass at a essentially a boiler, a template? I think one of the callers said she could send some supplemental information. So I forget which of our callers that was, but please do send information into Chris. Chris and Pam are very diligent about sharing all the information they have with us. So our inboxes are always full of emails from them. So, okay, well, with that, why don't we end this topic for this evening? This is number 4A on our agenda. The time is 9:30. And why don't we move to 4B? Chris, do you want to bring up the spreadsheet that you put together? I think it might be helpful for us to see just the list of what initiatives we were tasked with by town council last year, and where they all sit at the moment.
So Pam is the talented person of bringing up her screen. I am hopeless at bringing up my screen, so I rely on Pam to help. This is towards the end of the packet. And I must say that Doug put together a much more readable version of this, and maybe we'll send that out in the next packet or email it to you. His version has different colors. Actually, Pam helped me with this. This was nothing but a gray, kind of dull looking thing before Pam helped me to add some color to it. And then Doug made it even better. So, but we haven't shown you Doug's version, but we will. So anyway, this was a request by Doug to give you an update on where we were with all of the bylaws that we were asked to work on last year, or that we said we wanted to work on. And so the first part of the list is the town council priorities. And these are taken from the list that we went over with town council. Perhaps some of you weren't there, but there was a town council meeting on March 9th of 2021, and we gave them a PowerPoint presentation, and they had given us a whole bunch of priorities that they wanted us to work on, and then we told them what we wanted to work on, and we ended up with a list, an agreed upon list. But anyway, here we go, town council priorities. One of the things they wanted us to work on was adding footnote B to the BL zoning district. And we did work on a version of that. Nate and Rob Mora worked on creating an overlay district for the BL district, but it got kind of, what should I say? It took a lot of work, and it kind of got in the way of working on other things. So we put it aside to work on other priorities, but we would like to go back to that. We think it has merit, but maybe not in the short run, because we have a lot of other things on our plate right now. Revising this supplemental dwelling unit bylaw, that was something that we did accomplish. We're very proud of that. We drafted a new ADU bylaw, and that was adopted by town council. The demolition delay bylaw revisions, we drafted a new bylaw, which you have seen tonight, and we'll be working on that further. And I'm hoping that Ben will have a chance to talk to Janet about some of her issues, and maybe we'll come back with a revision in a few weeks. Moving apartments to site plan review in more districts. We did manage to do that. We moved apartments to site plan review in the RVC zoning district, but conversely, we moved apartments to special permit in the BG district. So that was something that we did accomplish, and that was adopted by town council. Removing footnote M turned out to be much more of a kind of a thorny issue than we had expected once we delved into it. And so we did a lot of research, presenting and discussing, but we tabled that item in order to work on other priorities. But we think some of that may still have merit, and maybe it's around the edges of the RG district that it makes sense to think about either removing or relaxing footnote M. So that may be something that will come back to you. Revising the apartments definition, we did start out to do that. We were going to lift the cap on the number of units that would be allowed in an apartment building. That ran into a lot of concern on the part of residents and others. And so we did table that due to other priorities, but we may bring that back again. Again, probably not in the near future, but my guess is we might bring it back sometime over the summer. Design guidelines or form-based code. Town council approved the funding of $100,000 to work on that project. We're currently developing an RFP. We have a draft, and we hope to hire a consultant this spring. As soon as the draft is in decent shape to show to the public, we will bring it to you and show it to you, but we still have some more work in-house to do on that. Then there was the temporary moratorium on new buildings. The planning board recommended against adoption of that one, and the town council did not adopt it. Then we have the Article 14 temporary zoning, which relates to allowing more outdoor dining and some other uses during this time of COVID. That was revised. We revised the 2020 bylaw that was adopted in 2020. It was revised and readopted by town council this past December. Then we have the temporary moratorium on solar installations. And although the planning board recommended against adoption of that at their December 15th meeting, the CRC recommended to adopt it at their January 27th meeting. So the town council is going to be holding first and second readings. The first reading will be on February 7th, and the second reading will be on February 28th, and they'll take a vote on February 28th. So my guess is that there were some changes made to the text. So now we have 5 town council members who are in favor of this, some of whom were not in favor of it the first time around. So my guess is that's going to pass, but I'm not necessarily so good at predicting things. We have the rezoning of parcel 14A33, which is the parcel behind CVS, known as the town parking lot behind CVS. There was a proposal to rezone that, and then the planning department came up with an overlay district rather than going to a straight BG rezoning, and that was adopted by town council. So we're very happy about that. Then we had parking regulations, which we took the parking regulations related to residential uses and drafted a new bylaw, and that bylaw was adopted by town council. There were several things that we were asked to work on, and we didn't have time to work on them, including adding footnote A to maximum lot coverage and maximum building coverage. What that would have done is have an option for someone to get a special permit to increase lot coverage or building coverage on properties, but we didn't have time to work on that. Working with the council on different housing types. Again, that would be like duplexes and triplexes and maybe quadruplexes, and allowing them in more places, and removing the triplexes and the quadruplexes from the definition of apartments so that they could be treated differently. We didn't have an opportunity to work on that. Town council wanted us to work on dimensional regulations in the RG and RBC zoning districts. Again, we didn't have time to work on that. Duplexes and triplexes, lowering the barriers to development of those. Didn't have time to work on that. And then Pam, can you scroll down a bit?
I can.
Let's see, frontage regulations for residential districts. Didn't work on that. Appropriate uses for village centers. Didn't have a chance to work on that. I think that came about as we repeated that twice. We shouldn't have, but we were trying to promote residential use in village centers. So a member of the public, actually, I think it was a member of town council, brought up the idea that we should make sure that we look at other uses besides residential uses in village centers, and sort of make it possible to have a good life in a village center. Have food available, pharmacy available, and other uses, dry cleaners and things like that. Transportation issues. Now, I'm not sure why that got put in this list, but I think it was the CRC or town council that put that in our list. And the planning board doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with that, but we may find that we will be able to work on that in the future. So let's see, what else? Planning department priorities. We did have some success with our priorities. The mixed use buildings definitions and standards was a new bylaw that we drafted, and that was adopted by town council. Inclusionary zoning, I'm very pleased that we were able to adopt a more robust inclusionary zoning bylaw. That was something that Janet McGowan has been really talking about and pushing for a long time, and others as well. So, we finally got that adopted, and we have, I think there are 22 units that we know about that will be coming about as a result of that in the near future. Recodification, we did draft the new bylaw, but we tabled it because we had other priorities, but we'll probably be bringing that back. And then flood maps and texts. So what's the current state of the flood maps is that we have the maps. We've gone through the last appeal period on the flood maps. We're expecting to get a letter of final determination from FEMA sometime in the next month or so, probably in March. And once we get that letter, then we have 6 months to adopt the flood maps. And we also have to adopt a text related to flood mapping. And Nate is currently working on that. So he'll probably be bringing that to show you, sometime in the next couple of months. And I think we're meeting with our consultant on that project, either maybe next week. Yeah, I think it's next week. So we're making progress on that. And hopefully I won't have to keep talking to you about flood maps for the next few years. Hopefully we'll get it resolved and finished and approved, maybe by the end of the summer, maybe by September or October. So that is my rundown on zoning amendments, the things that we became aware of last year that people wanted to work on. And I think we had a pretty good track record. We got 7 of our amendments passed.
All right, thanks, Chris. So my thought with requesting this list was that we could use it to, give ourselves a pat on the back for the hard work that was adopted, and then talk about what our priorities might be for the coming year. Now, we've already, the solar bylaw has jumped to the front of the line. The historic building preservation bylaw seems to be right on the front burner right now. But Chris, at what point do you anticipate staff would have time to come back to any of these that have been tabled? Is it March or is it May?
I'm gonna guess May, because right now we're working on the flood mapping, we're working on the solar bylaw. We're also, I was asked to give an update on the design guidelines, so I'll try to do that. But that project is, we hope, going to launch relatively soon. So we do have a number of things on our burner right now. We've also applied to DLTA, Pioneer Valley Planning Commission has this program called District Local Technical Assistance. And Jack kind of helped us to remember to apply for something this year. But one thing that's been talked about a lot, especially in the planning department and with the building commissioner, but it hasn't really gotten out to the public, is that farmers have come to us and said, we would really like to be able to have a brewery and have beer tastings, and we would like to have a winery and have wine tastings, and we would like to have the occasional wedding on our property, and maybe a seminar about something. And there's really no slot that we can put those kinds of things into. So what we did was, when Pioneer Valley Planning Commission came around with their offer of technical assistance this year, we said, well, maybe that's something that we should focus on. That's kind of a happy thing. It's a thing that would, lift people's spirits. It would also be good for economic development. It would be good to help farmers to, be able to stay on their farms. And and we know other towns do it. Northampton has, the ability to do that, and others do too. And we want to figure out how can Amherst do it, respecting the idea that people who live in those districts don't want a lot of traffic or noise or whatever, but there must be ways of doing these things that don't have a negative impact on the surroundings, but would also, make Amherst an attractive place for people to come, and also help with economic development. So we're looking into that, and if that, if it works and we get the grant and Pioneer Valley Planning Commission is willing to work with us, that's something that we would like to begin to work on as well. So in terms of, working on other things on this list, I would say later this spring, maybe May, is a good time to think about that. Yep.
Okay, so we should put a mark on our calendar to have a conversation about this in May then. Mm-hmm. Janet, I'm seeing your physical hand raised.
I went old school. Chris, Lynn Griesmer has been saying that she wants to look at other sites for parking garages downtown. Has there been discussion of that as a?
Yeah. Yes, there has been a discussion of that with regard to asking for money for to evaluate the Boltwood garage for its structural ability to handle another story or two. Other than that, we don't have, we're not actively looking, but if town council tells us, we really want you to look at this, then we'll work with them and try to figure things out. But right now, we're just asking for money to look at the Boltwood garage.
Okay.
All right, thanks. So unless anybody else has any further comments on where we stand with all these things, I think we could move on. Okay. Next, the time is 9:46 and we're at old business, item 5 in the agenda. Chris, is there any other old business?
Nope.
All right. Item 6 on the agenda is new business. Any other new business not anticipated?
Janet asked me to give an update on design guidelines. Would that be an appropriate time to do that?
Sure, why not?
So, yeah, so what, as I said before, Nate is working on an RFP to hire a qualified urban design and architectural firm specializing in design, architecture, streetscape design, community engagement, and zoning to lead a public process for envisioning the future of the town center and developing downtown design standards for the town. We've done some research on what other cities and towns have done, and we think we've got a pretty good basis for an RFP. We're hoping that we could put it out maybe at the end of February or sometime in the beginning of March, and that we might be able to sign up, and we would get responses and hold interviews sometime in April, and then maybe sign a contract with a consultant in May. And we would like to finish this project by the time town council is, this term of town council is finished, so that we wouldn't have to lap over into another term of town council. So that's what we're thinking right now. And as soon as we have that RFP in a decent enough shape, we'll bring it to you to show it to you. All right.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other new business?
Nope.
All right. Form A&R subdivisions, anything?
Not this time. I think we have 2 for next time. Is that right, Pam?
I believe so. One, most definitely.
Okay, all right, ZBA applications. I think you had mentioned one before, but are there any new ones?
I don't have any new ones to report tonight. I didn't mention anything tonight.
Not tonight, it was in a previous meeting,
Oh,
so that's
sorry,
fine.
but I have nothing new for tonight. Sorry.
Nothing to report.
All right, SP, SBR, and SUB.
We do have an application from Susan Morello, who owns a house on, I think it's on High Street. And she would like to create an owner-occupied duplex. So she's going to be coming to you with that probably. She left a couple of days ago to visit her grandchild in Florida, so she's not going to be back for 3 weeks. So it'll be sometime about, a month or so from now. But it's a nice project.
And this is a duplex, not an accessory dwelling.
It is a duplex. It's an owner-occupied duplex, which is allowed by site plan review in the RG district. She owns the building, and she's going to sell it to somebody who intends to occupy the building and rent the other unit.
Okay. All right, it's now 9:50 and we're up to item 10, the planning board committee and liaison reports. Jack, do you want to say anything about PVPC?
Nothing significant, but I think the infrastructure, dollars, everybody's keeping their eye on that, and how we can get better connectivity with Eastern Mass, Hartford,
Okay,
whatever. But
all right, Andrew is not here to update us on CPAC. Tom, anything on DRB?
Not this week, nope.
Okay. Chris, anything on CRC? You've already mentioned that they talked about the solar moratorium. Did they talk about anything else?
Yeah, well, they talked about the solar moratorium at their last meeting. This meeting coming up.
Actually,
They have-
would you mind telling us the members of the CRC now? Because
can I remember the members of CRC? Let's see. There's Mandy Joe and Shalini and Anna Devlin Gautier and oh my goodness. It's too late in the evening for me to remember.
Isn't Pam Rooney?
Pam Rooney, of course, yes.
So that's
there are 5
4.
members. There's 5 altogether. I can look them up.
And is Jennifer
Taub, yes, yes.
she the 5th?
She's the 5th. Yep.
Okay.
Apologies to everyone whose names I didn't remember.
Do they have a regular meeting date? Did they switch or are they just popping around?
They have a tentative meeting schedule that they're going to review tomorrow. They're meeting again tomorrow. They met on January 27th. They're meeting again tomorrow, and then they're meeting February 24th. So they're going to vote on this tentative schedule on February 3rd, and then they will have a schedule. But the meetings are going to be at 4:30, or at least tomorrow's meeting is at 4:30 in the afternoon. And they're going to be considering an extension of Article 14, actually not an extension, but they're going to be looking at Article 14 and thinking about which of these things do we want to go forward with. In other words, are there things that we want to make permanent about Article 14? So that's one of the things. And the other thing, I've been asked to speak about it, and I'm just drawing a blank on what it is. So I can send you an email about it, but I said I would be able to speak about it, but that's tomorrow, not tonight.
Okay. All right. So that's it for committee and liaison reports. Report of chair, I really don't have anything this evening. Report of staff, Chris, anything you want to say?
No, except thanks again for all the work you did in 2021, and I hope that 2022 is going to be a little easier, but we have a lot on our plates.
Okay. And so the time is 9:53, and unless I see any objections, we can adjourn.
None.
All right. Thank you all.
Okay, thanks.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
I'll just stop recording to the cloud. Yeah.
Recording stopped.
Okay. Good night.
Good night, Pam. See you in a couple of weeks.
Unless you come into town hall.
Well,
And-
doesn't seem like I need to sign anything.
Mm,
We didn't do anything.
We didn't do any of that tonight, but you will have to come in to sign all those other ones soon. Right?
Okay. Well,
Amherst College, and
did I not already do that?
maybe you did. I don't know. That's Chris's
I think I
value,
did.
not mine.
So
All right. Have a great weekend.
you too.
Bye.
Bye.